Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this council meeting on the 12th of May 2020. This is our first live streaming effort, so apologies in advance for any errors that might happen along the way, but we're all getting very used to video streaming as we go, so it should be all good. Anyone watching this via Facebook's able to make comments on the Facebook page, and if there's any questions and so on, if they aren't able to be answered at the moment, they'll be answered later on. I just want to make sure that you understand a wee bit around the council meeting. So the meetings have standing orders, rules that the meetings go by. That just allows everyone to have an equal opportunity to be able to speak and to ask questions, and shares the load around. So that's the purpose of that. Along the way, we'll try and explain a few things if we think that some of the items might require a bit of extra explanation. But the agenda, if you want to find that, is also available on the council website, so that you can refer to that, so you know what we're talking about at times. We're taking a couple of breaks during this session. One will be at 10:15 for morning tea, and then another at 12:30 for lunch, and we'll just continue on after that as we come back. So we're about to get underway, and just checking through my notes here, we'll go to the agenda. So welcome to any of the public who are watching this, also warm welcome to councillors and staff, and to the media who are also observing this at the same time. So first of all, we'll go to any apologies. So are there any apologies? None. Okay, any declarations of interest? Councillor Kingan.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Item 6.3, the NOICL refinancing proposal. I wish to have a declare conflict of interest. I'll explain later what that's about.
Noted, thank you. Anyone else? It's all good. Right, we'll now move on to the first item, the public minutes from the council meeting held on the 18th of February. So just a reminder to councillors, if there's minor edits that need, or grammatical changes that need to be done, just please pass them on to Ainsley later on. But if there's anything that's changing the nature of what's being said, please speak up and let us know what they are. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, Mr. Look, page 16, at the very top of that page, there's a reference to a motion that was supposedly put, and it says the wording in the minutes is clause 19.4 fine-tunes the wording in bracket A bracket along the lines of, quote, the chairperson in putting the motion must call for an expression of interest on first the voices. And now I don't believe that the words along the lines of should be in a recommendation or a resolution. That's, you know, a resolution has to be what it is, not along the lines of something or other. And I think the minutes should be adopted with those words removed.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Thank you. Anything else anyone wants to raise on those ones? Someone like to move that they are accepted? Councillor McRoby and Councillor Tavendale. Thank you. Any further comment on those? All those in favour, please raise your hand. And those against, that's carried. Thank you. Now move on to the next lot of minutes. And just find those. Sorry. Just working off a couple of devices on this. So public minutes for the additional council meeting held on the 18th of March on page 27. Any comments on those first? Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, sorry, Mayor Kircher, but look, once again, on page 41, bearing in mind these are minutes that'll supposedly inform us and the public, if you look on page 41 under 3, resolution WDC 2020-038, Resolution 3 is recorded as follows: confirms updated LTP Year 3 projects as set out in Appendix 3 with amendments, and then list those modifying and adding in as on the screen. Now, sorry, that's no use to anyone. What we need is whatever information was on the screen at the time, incorporated as an appendix or something. That it's
Yeah.
yeah.
I accept that. That's obviously a note that hasn't been changed over to what was intended there. So, so for an explanation, as we were working through this, we were referring to a spreadsheet on the screen. A number of changes were made to that, so it's just making sure that those changes were incorporated into the final resolution. So, yep, that's good. Good one. Good spotting. Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments on that one? Okay, would someone like to move that we accept those minutes, please?
I'll move.
Councillor Hopkins, Councillor Kingan seconded that, and those in favour, please raise your hand. And those against. Right, that's accepted. Now moving on to page 44 for the minutes of the emergency council meeting held on the 27th March. So as you'll recall, that was sort of a day into lockdown, and some of us met physically and some met via video conference at that time. So any comments on that one? Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, sorry, Mayor Kircher. Look, just on page 51, there's a reference to discussion about the emergency committee and so forth, and how there were various amendments that were proposed or suggested. And if you look on the third sentence on that, on page 51, there's a reference to Councillor Hopkins agreed to remove the word back and make it just report so that it could happen at any time. And that sentence has no relationship to anything. There's a reference earlier to a fact that I sought to move recommendations 5 and 6 with an amendment that it doesn't refer to back or report or anything. I actually think it's confusing, and the minutes would be better if that sentence was removed entirely, especially given that the resolution was ultimately moved without amendment.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. When I went through these, I wasn't sure what that was referring to, but sort of leave it in at that time. But yeah, if you're happy that it's removed, that does make sense. Anything else, councillors? Okay, would someone like to move we adopt those, please? Councillor Tavendale and Councillor Milmine, thank you. All those in favour, raise your hand. And those against, that is carried. Thank you. Right, and on to the last set of minutes from the additional council meeting held on the 9th of April on page 60. Again, ask for any comments on those. Nothing. Okay. Someone would like to move that we adopt those then. Councillor Wallstein and Councillor McRoby seconds that. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And those against, that is carried. Right, that's that out of the way. So move on to my Mayor's report on page 65. As we know, things are changing very quickly. Over the last 8 weeks, there's been a lot happening and a lot of activity going on. Tried to capture what I can in this latest update, and obviously yesterday we found out that we were going to go to level 2 on Thursday, so that isn't incorporated in here, but I just want to acknowledge the huge amount of work that's been going on in preparation for going to level 2, both inside council and outside. It's a significant amount of work, and there's a lot to be done. A lot of changes for a lot of businesses that are happening, and it's really good to see them being able to get up and running. And with the Waitaki district having had 0 cases throughout this whole event, had 1 or 2 pop up, but then they've disappeared because they actually belonged elsewhere. And with the southern region, Otago and Southland, not having had any cases for over 3 weeks now, I think we're in a very good place. And well, we already knew we lived in paradise, but this just makes it even sweeter. So happy to take any comments or questions on my report. Councillor McRoby.
Quick question, Mayor, just in terms of the shovel-ready projects, and this might be covered elsewhere, but it is in your report. Have there been any changes since the report was written to today in terms of notice on the shovel-ready projects from central government?
So we've had the further information asked on 3 of them, but I need to just check with Mr. Power or Mr. Jorgensen as to whether there's been any update on that.
No, there hasn't been any update at this point. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So we wait with bated breath. Councillor Wallstein, then Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Kircher. Just a question on the bottom of page 69 regarding the Three Waters team being perhaps taken over by central government, which, as you state, there'll be a loss of personnel, a loss of capacity in the local council, and a loss of a cost centre to share the cost of overheads more widely. Is there any further update on that from since when you wrote your report?
No, there's it's pretty much where we're at the moment. Certainly, the information that's coming through from the government is that the trend is more towards having a few large organisations throughout the country, and I know our team's working closely with our neighbours to see how we can all work more effectively and efficiently together, but that may be overridden by this. But there's certainly a lot of activity happening at local government, central government level, trying to make sure that we're actually working together to get the best result for our consumers. So that work continues, and we're just going to have to keep pushing for a solution that actually works for us and our ratepayers, and not just a one-size-fits-all policy.
Thank you, Mayor Kircher. I think it would be just a final comment. It would be a travesty if local government lost that part of their service to the community.
Yeah, I think it's a service we do well, and we keep improving on. There's a lot of activity going on there, but time will tell on that. Now, Councillor Hopkins, I think you're next, and then Councillor Tavendale, and then Councillor McRoby. You're muted, Jim. Yep.
I've been unmuted. Thank you. Look, a question and a comment. I endorse Councillor Wallstein's comments about water, by the way, but the Emergency Operations Centre, you talk about people being there for an undue or lengthy period of time. And the last sentence in that portion of your report, you say, I believe we should be working with the Chief Executive to find a better solution to the problem, which is, an over dependence on council staff who are supposed to be doing other things. I wonder if we shouldn't timetable that, given, the possibility of moving back into level 3 or whatever, should there be new outbreaks, and also look at things like maybe incorporating elected members as part of that EOC team. It seems to me if we're going to work with the CE, maybe we make a commitment to start now. What do you think?
Yeah, certainly we need to have that discussion. Yes. Yeah. And I'm not taking away from the quality of work that our team does. It's in most cases it really adds a lot of value to have our staff involved in the EOC. But when you get an ongoing situation such as a pandemic or even earthquake type recovery, then that becomes a real challenge to try and get their day jobs done, as well as what work needs to be done in the EOC. Not an easy solution, but just something we have to certainly have a discussion on. So we will schedule that. Councillor Tavendale.
Good morning. Just a comment and a question, I guess, on your open letter to the government. It was well worded, and I think it really explained well why one size fits all comment, like was made by Minister Twyford, is not always relevant to every council, and I think it was probably quite harsh of him to come out quite bluntly like that. So I commend your letter. I think it's strongly worded and explains our situation well. Just wondering around trying to actually make sure that gets in front of the right people. Outside of it being an open letter on the agenda, how are we getting that in front of the Prime Minister and other ministers?
I was basically seeking your endorsement from councillors if they wished that it is directly sent to the Prime Minister and Cabinet, and I'd be very happy to do that.
I believe we should.
Okay. Is there general agreement that they would like that to happen? Okay. Yeah. No, we'll make that happen. Councillor Hopkins, just very quickly.
Well, look, that was the comment I wanted to make. I thought your letter was superb, and I was going to move that the council endorses and supports your open letter, because at the moment it's yours, and I believe we should vote today to make it ours. So I move that the council endorses the Mayor's open letter to the Prime Minister and Cabinet.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Tavendale, you second that? Thank you very much. Councillor McRoby.
This item, Mayor, is probably the most significant and important item on today's agenda. This item, and I commend you for that letter and totally support the approach we're taking. We cannot, absolutely cannot, have central government taking away matters that relate to our local community the way that Twyford has been purported to have said. That is just totally unacceptable to me. And anybody that I've spoken to about this have also said the same thing. And so I cannot stress enough that this is the most important item on today's agenda, because it's taking local democracy away from our ratepayers, our community, ourselves, and has a major, major influence all around New Zealand. I cannot stress that enough. So today, Mayor, I commend you for your letter, and let's get it off and perhaps personally deliver it if you can. But it really does mean a lot, and it's crucially important that we just dare not let that happen.
Thank you very much for that support. Was there any other comment, or I can just put that motion? So I'll put it. Those in favour, can you please raise your hand? Those against? Okay, that's carried. So yep, we'll make that happen, and we'll see whether it's hand delivered or well, won't be hand delivered. Might be on a 2-metre pole, but we'll see how we get on. Right. No, thank you very much for that support. Any other comments on my report? Councillor Milmine.
Yes, thank you. I just want to, it's just a comment, drawing attention to page 68, the second last paragraph. There's just a comment in there along the lines of, for example, there are 3 different Shop Locally campaigns going on, and it wouldn't be good use of our support and stimulus funds to fund all 3 of them. But I just want to draw our attention back to the purpose that we set up the support and stimulus fund in the first place, which is within the minutes of the 18th of March. It's loud and clear that we have set it up for the requirement to allow existing projects to be brought forward, or new projects to be created that allow the temporary employment of Waitaki residents. And given that we haven't really sorted out the terms of reference or the or accepted the policy for what we're going to be spending the money on, I just think it's a little bit preemptive to have words like that in there. It could be misleading. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. There were other purposes set out in the original proposal for the support and stimulus fund, and I've used the words "I doubt" that it would be good use deliberately, because this is my opinion, and yeah, we definitely won't have a firm view as council until we've got that sorted. Just in the same way that the letter we just talked about, that was my opinion, but now that we've adopted it, it's become council opinion.
Yeah, I'm just letting you know my opinion.
Yep. No, thank you very much for that. Taken on board. Right. Any other comments? Someone would like to move my report be received? Councillor Hopkins and Councillor Tavendale, thank you. Any further comments? I'll put it. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And those against? That's carried. Thank you very much. We'll now move on to the Chief Executive's report. I'd probably just before I do that, just apologise for the very long list of meetings and so on at the end. They hadn't been updated since in February sometime, so it ended up being a couple more pages than normal. But anyway, now move over to the CE's report. Sorry, Councillor Kingan.
Oh, look, I don't think you should be apologising for the length of that list. I think it just points out just how busy you've been of late. And I just make that point.
No, thank you very much. Right, Mr. Power. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to everybody who is listening to this first streaming session of Council. The Chief Executive's report, the objective of this report is to provide information to elected members that they wouldn't otherwise generally have access to necessarily as a result of the comprehensive reporting done as a matter of course by group managers and others. This report contains a reference to my thanks to all of my staff who I have had great pride in during this period of the pandemic. They've responded with great agility and with great compassion for the community. And many of them have been working extraordinary hours, and I just want to place on record my thanks to them. So the primary issues that are outlined in this report relate to three sections. One is central government impacts on our operations. The other is regional or local government impacts on our operations. And the third relates to internal matters such as health and safety and monitoring of our accidents and incidents, so that elected members can be aware that those things are being monitored and dealt with on a regular basis. I'll take the report as read and I'd be very happy to answer any questions that elected members might have.
Okay, councillors, any questions? Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, look, Mr. Power, thank you very much for this. I've got three questions, if I can ask them all now or one at a time, whichever you prefer, Mr. Mayor.
Well, start on it and we'll see how they go.
Look, we heard level 2 announcement yesterday, and amongst other things, playgrounds are now open. Gatherings of 100 are possible. So the question really is, when are our playgrounds going to be open? When is our library, aquatic centre, and possibly the Opera House going to be open? I mean, will it be Thursday? I mean, will people be able to go to our playgrounds on Thursday and use them?
Yes, well, Councillor Hopkins, we have a team generating a comprehensive information pack in relation to this today, and that should be released later on in the day. There are a myriad of decisions associated with all of Council's operations. So we probably don't want to go into all the details surrounding those during this meeting. We'll be here for a very long time. But essentially, most operations will return to normal, although with some limits on numbers, but you can look forward to that information being broadcast in print media and on social media and Council's website as well. Okay, so watch the space. We'll hear today, but the answer, generally speaking, is as soon as possible. Is that a fair summary of what you just told us? Yes, that's correct. Just moving to my next question, and this relates to your, I think it's your graphs on, I'll have to try and find the page, trying to avoid rustling. Actually, I'll find it, Mayor Kircher, I'll come back to it if I may. And let's.
Yep, I'll take Councillor Wolfstein in the meantime.
Thank you, Mayor Kircher. Yes, Fergus, just a question on page number 92, article number 6. regarding personnel management during the COVID lockdown. And I'm very pleased to see that multiple members of staff across council are actively providing much needed support to agencies such as the Ministry of Social Development, Queensland Lakes District Council for welfare calls, also Otago Civil Defence and Emergency Management. So it's great that staff were able to be made available and to provide a worthwhile service to those external bodies. Just my question is there any recompense to council for the staff provided to external bodies, or is that just purely a public service by council during the lockdown period?
Essentially, it's a public service by council. It's part of our duties under the Civil Defence and Emergency Management Act and the Civil Defence, Otago Civil Defence Emergency Operations Centre is statutorily, it's a creature of statute, and we are required to man that centre and undertake those functions. So especially in relation to periods where there's a declaration of national emergency or where there is a civil defence emergency, essentially the controller of civil defence assumes authority and directs those resources as necessary. We're very, very happy to assist in this regard because obviously it assists the community. In relation to assisting Queenstown Lakes, it must always be remembered that tomorrow it may be our turn. So it's a very common thing for local authorities to assist one another when in need, because we just do not know what is around the corner for us and our communities, perhaps next year.
Thank you, Fergus. I'm very pleased to hear that, because I'm very pleased that our staff are able to provide be kept employed and provide a very valuable service to other organisations. So it's well done.
Yes, and we've received some very pleasing compliments from the likes of Southern District Health Board and others who've been really impressed by the professionalism and the willingness of the staff.
I've served one of those letters that we've received. Yep. So well done to all the staff involved.
Thank you. I'll pass that on.
Right. Take Councillor Tivendale next, and then Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you. I do agree that our staff have been really well redeployed, and it's been really good to see them out and about helping. Just a few questions on the rural broadband upgrade. How do you see that affecting us, Fergus, and what do we need to do, or is there anything we need to do to make sure we're on any list we need to be on to make sure our rural communities benefit from the 15 mil from Chris Farquhar?
Well, we should take every opportunity to advocate on behalf of our rural communities that do not have good broadband, because internationally it's becoming more and more recognised and sometimes recognised in statute that access to high-speed broadband is a fundamental human right. That might seem like a strange approach for those that are not in tune with the digital age. But in reality, lack of access to high-speed broadband does reduce people's ability to be productive, to have access to employment opportunities, access to distance health services, and a myriad of other things. I defer that answer, if I can, Councillor, to our pandemic economic recovery manager, Jared Quinn, whose reporting I've deliberately taken out of my chief executive's report, because during this pandemic economic recovery phase, it's a very high interest area, and I think it deserves its own reporting process, etc. And Jared will be able to address that question when we get to Jared's report, if that's satisfactory.
Was that a nod to me, Mayor Kircher?
Yes.
Yep, sorry. Fergus, perhaps a little less positively, and apologies, but pages 88 and 89, key RMA trends, all the trends nationwide are in the wrong direction, longer time to process things, higher costs. What is most concerning to me on page 89 is this, the median application fees for resource consent applications. Now, ours, judging by the dot, looks as though it's about $1,400, more or less. Now, we don't know what rate offset other councils are applying, but if I do a count, which I have, we are at the moment more expensive than 18 other South Island local authorities, including all our neighbours. And the only councils in the South Island that cost more than us are DCC, Christchurch City and ECAN. And I think we need to look at this. I'm sorry, but especially now, when we're looking about recoveries and costs and all the rest of it, that is not a particularly positive position to be in. And I would ask you to undertake to do some stringent examination of this, and let's sit down and see if we can't have a task force of some of our own costs, including this one. What's your view?
Yes, well, that's the very reason that I've included this graphic in here. It is always important for us to measure ourselves against others. There are a number of factors that come into play in relation to this. Well, firstly, on a more positive side, I would say that we are on the lower end of the median, if you like. What we do need to recognize is that we are operating in an environment where professional resource management planners are extremely difficult to obtain and maintain. And it's highly competitive out there in the environment. Ms. Guyan may need to correct me on this, but a substantial amount of our resource consent activity as a matter of necessity is actually assigned to external contractors and consultants who undertake this work, obviously at a higher expense than would otherwise be the case if we were able to actually secure those personnel and operate the functions in-house. Now, we've been working, as many parts of the country have been doing, we've been working very hard on securing people, even going to the extent of developing a specific recruitment movie aimed at resource management planners to attract them to the district. Most recently, an offer was made to a very capable planner out of the United States. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, they've had to actually discontinue their application. They're extremely rare to find, but I can assure you that we are really doing everything we possibly can.
Fergus, sorry, with your forbearance, Mayor Kircher, the same problems affect Invercargill, Gore, Southland, Kaikoura, Westland, Grey District, Selwyn, Hurunui, Waimati, Ashburton, Marlborough, Timaru and West Coast region, and they're all cheaper than us.
Yes, well,
so there may be something that we are doing that we're not doing as well as they are, or as competitive.
Yeah, I think you made the point, Councillor Hopkins, and I think Mr. Power is trying to answer.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, Councillor Hopkins, you self-answered yourself in your opening statement. We do have a policy relating to cost recovery, and obviously that policy differs all across the country. We could reduce the cost to businesses by reducing our cost recovery objectives as set out in our annual plan and long-term plan. And that, of course, is entirely the decision of elected members to make that kind of policy decision. And of course, we'll execute that should you choose to do that.
I just have a question on the graphic. It's certainly the description of it is it may be a bit misleading. It talks about being the application fee, and often there's an application fee for a resource consent, and then there's another charge for whatever the actual the balance is. Is this graph representative of that total charge that people are paying? I assume it is, but the description differs from that.
My understanding, I might have this wrong, and again, I'd defer to Ms. Guyan, who's the specialist in this area, but my understanding, it's the actual cost. One of the interesting things that did come out of this report that I have discussed with Ms. Guyan is that under the regulations, there is an opportunity for a discount to be provided to people who are seeking or applying for resource consent, so that if timelines are not met, etc., then they are entitled to a discount. When the Ministry for the Environment undertook this analysis, what they found was that the data indicated that a certain quantum of discount should have been provided by local authorities throughout New Zealand. However, in the final analysis, there was a differential between the two. So it appears that local authorities have not returned money to those people who have sought resource consents but not received the service that is statutorily required to be delivered. And I've asked Ms. Guyon to investigate whether we are achieving the appropriate success in returning fees to people where we perhaps have not met statutory timelines. Although having said that, we do perform very well generally in that area.
Okay. Councillor Hopkins, did you have one more question, or is that it? You're on mute, sorry.
Very quickly, the meeting with the Whitestone Geopark Trust on the 6th of May, I'm just wondering, given all of the other tourism ventures that are hibernating or mothballed at the moment, is there a Project Geopark anymore, and is it perhaps time to mothball it? What is your view?
It's a question that has been raised, and a very definitive answer has come back from the industry, and that is that it still has relevance in that it is the one overarching initiative that has the potential to benefit every last square kilometre of the district. It's a question that's probably best addressed to Tourism Waitaki, who is the agency that specialises in tourism for the district. But it is seen as having great relevance, and in fact, in relation to COVID-19 economic recovery, the Department of Conservation, Land Information New Zealand and Environment Canterbury have approached Council to see how they can help inject further assistance money into the district through the mechanism of the Geopark.
I think the point is, we haven't discussed this in that context, and so yes, it's still, it's still a council project in conjunction with the community. We do need to have the discussion, but at a time when every single district around New Zealand's looking at the domestic market, the districts that have unique selling propositions will be the ones that capture the imagination. And this is not just a tourism product. It's actually about us valuing our own geography and geology and stories as well. So I think it has a lot of relevance, but what we need to do is have that discussion separately to this about, is it something that we want to continue supporting? There was a larger amount allocated for the next year's annual plan. We cut that back because we won't be getting any assessments done. So it's very much a scaled back proposal for this coming year, but it's something that we need to discuss as to, are we continuing to support it or not, so that we can answer that question properly. I've got Councillor McRoby next, and then Councillor Milway.
Look, just coming back to Councillor Hopkins' comments about where we sit in this RMA cost structure. Look, I think we're trying to beat ourselves up a bit here, no disrespect, but there are 21 other councils, or 28 other councils, sorry, that range from about $950 to $1,400 if Councillor Hopkins' number is correct. And I actually don't think that's too bad. Sure, we have to look at our costs, but let's not beat ourselves up. We're doing pretty well. That's all I'll say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Milway.
Thank you. Just going back to the Geopark discussion, I think it's important to make it clear that all of us support protecting the assets of our amazing district. It's only anything that's ever been discussed and been kind of caused a little bit of controversy is the UNESCO branding and the expense behind that. So I just wanted to make that comment in there. And I mean, so if we move forward and continue on protecting the assets, there's no problem at all with that. It's just how relevant is the UNESCO branding in this current climate?
Yep. Thank you very much. Okay, any other questions, comments on CE's report? Okay, would someone like to move that we receive that? Councillor McRoby, and seconded by Just looking through someone. Councillor Newton, thank you very much. Right, so all those in favour, could you please raise your hand? And those against? That's carried. Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Mr. Power. It's appreciated. And just echoing the comments by others around the staff and the different activities they've been doing around the community. We thank them very much for that. And it's been great having them out there as ambassadors and helping our community. We'll now move to page 96, councillors, and to the review of local approved products policy, the LAP policy for psychoactive substances. And Mr. Hope, do you wish to speak to this one?
Yeah, I will just make a few comments, and then Mr. Searle might want to add anything else, and he will certainly be the person that needs to answer any questions. But this is a relatively straightforward item. The policy that was developed 3 years ago does need to be reviewed. It's time for that review to happen. Given the activity in this space, both locally and nationally, it's recommended that the policy be continued as is to ensure that there are controls, even though there is no demand at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Right, questions? Councillor Tavendale.
Not so much a question, just that there was a lot of work put into this at the start, and it was covering, the police and a number of other agencies and getting their input on it. It hasn't been tested yet, which is kind of a good thing. But I don't think much has changed, and so until it's actually being tested in the field by requirement, and the fact that we've got no substances currently approved, we've got no manufacturers approved, I don't think there's much need to change anything at this stage.
Thank you. Right, Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, look, I agree with Councillor Tavendale, and I'd be happy either to move this recommendation or those in favour of it, but I would make this point. The resolution says that as a result of a review, etc., no changes are necessary. Well, I believe that any review must include local elected members. I'm sorry, but it should, especially of a policy like this. And basically, this has come to us one day before the 5-year deadline has elapsed. And yes, okay, you could argue we are reviewing it in the sense that it's on the agenda. But I think, it's probably got overlooked. And I just flagged that we have not sat down and had a conversation amongst ourselves about whether we want to talk to the community, whether there is anything we would like to change or whatever. I don't think there is. But I think as a principle, it's worth flagging that this review should have included us earlier than today.
Okay, I'll just ask Mr. Searle if he wants to comment on that.
Yes, I can. One of the reasons that we didn't take it to elected members prior to now was, it's pretty much outlined in the report, is that there are actually no products approved in New Zealand. Because of that, and there is no local issues, I didn't see a need to involve the elected members unnecessarily. The review date of the 13th of May is just that. We only have to review prior to 13th of May. We don't have to approve or change, amend, or consult on an amended policy prior to that date. It's just the start of a review.
Okay, hopefully that's helpful. Any other questions or comments? Okay, Councillor Tavendale.
I'm happy to move it with no amendments.
I'll second that.
So moved Councillor Tavendale, second Councillor Hopkins, and just a reminder just to raise hands when you want to do that. So are there any further discussions on the matter? Okay, we'll put it, those in favour of it being accepted, please raise your hands. Those against? That's carried. Thank you very much. Now move on to page 104 and discuss the Assets Group Renewal Project Delegations. Now, Mr. How do you want to speak to this, or one of the group managers?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll leave this to Mr. Jorgensen or Mr. Van der Stek.
Okay. Mr. Jorgensen.
Right, I can introduce this. Hello, everybody. So what we're looking for as a result of this article is really just a change to the procurement delegations. So what the team is trying to do is ensure it can be a little more nimble with particularly our contractors and suppliers we have in the marketplace. One of the key messages from government has been around trying to be nimble and in our quest to re-stimulate the economy is to try and make sure we've got work available and get it procured as quickly as we can. The procurement phase does often take quite a bit of time, and so we're just simply here trying to speed up that process a bit by able to engage with our local contracting community to share the work around a bit and just get the work going. So we have hit the ground relatively well running at the moment, and we've got a good amount of work carrying on. We just want to be able to sustain that for a period. So that's what we're looking at there. It is very much focused on renewal works. So these are works that are highlighted in asset management plans and activity management plans, and have some sort of prior approval from council. We're not looking at doing works that aren't approved or need alternative funding that isn't already in place. So that would need a separate process to go through in due course, and would need formal councillor decisions. The amount of work we think it might cover, we didn't put an amount in there. We're thinking around the $3.5 million worth of work will be carried out in this period under this sort of delegation. So it's a very small chunk of work, and that's pretty much what we feel the contracting community and what we as staff can actually have the capacity to manage. As part of this work, we're suggesting, as council is the owner of Whitestone Contracting, that we specify an amount of $1 million to be allocated towards them. So this is purely on as the owner and protecting, I guess, the company, which is owned by the ratepayer, somewhat by being able to make available a guaranteed work program to fit into their planning purposes. This just enables Whitestone to be able to have some certainty about the amount of work that would be available to them, and just assist with their forward planning over the next wee while, to help ensure that they can redeploy their staff locally as much as possible while they're seeking out other works. They of course could be part of other processes as well, as will other contractors in our community. Whitestone have said they obviously use local subcontractors and suppliers as well. We have suggested that some of the renewal projects would be brought forward a little. However, we did want to put a backstop in there, and we're suggesting that the resolution we've suggested is that we would not exceed a 3-year deficit in any depreciation fund. So if we're doing works in a particular area, if it meant that depreciation fund would go into deficit for more than 3 years worth of annual contributions, then that project wouldn't be proceeded with. So it does ensure that we can't go too far in a particular area and put a community's fund into debt too far. And that's essentially the gist of the report. So yeah, it's very much around the procurement process, and a separate process. It's not intended to cover works that aren't approved in some way. I think that's it.
Okay, thank you very much. So first of all, councillors, do you have any questions? Councillor McRobbie.
First question, look, it's a good report. So I have two elements to my question. The first one is maybe a little more clarity around the $1 million out of a total of $3.5 million. And also I would like to ask our assets councillor, Councillor Kingham, is what his thoughts are on this recommendation here, being the leader of the assets committee.
Sure. Yeah, so around the $1 million, it's the bulk of that work would be in the waters area. There's quite a bit of work that can be progressed with our water infrastructure, and so that's where that funding would be directed as a result of this resolution. So that Whitestone Contracting do have a number of water or drainage crews that can do this type of work for us. Does that answer what you were?
Yeah, look, the other part to that question before I get to Councillor Kim's part was just in relation to treatment of a CCO and how we handle that versus external requirements for procurement. And I'm just trying to understand the allocation of the $1 million versus the total of 3.5, of which 1 million wouldn't go through a procurement process per se, or certainly out to the general contracting community, whereas the 2.5 approximately would. Am I right in making that assumption?
Not quite. There's still a process we'll be going through with all of that money. So what's intended is we will negotiate rates with any of the contractors we are dealing with. So it's not just Whitestone we'll be directly engaging with. We'll be doing that with other parties as well, depending on the type of work that's needed and who's available and who's got capacity. Quite a few of the contractors actually have enough work just at the moment, and so it's, you know, these timing matters, and then of course negotiating the rates. So there is still a process to go through, and then that needs to be approved by Paul, myself, and the Chief Executive Officer as the backstop to this process. So there is a process in place. It's just a bit different, and it will enable us to be more nimble, but it's certainly not trying to shortcut any procurement processes to ensure we're getting the best value for our ratepayers.
Okay, thank you. Bill.
You're still on mute, Councillor Kingham.
Right, let's try again. Hey, Neil's covered it pretty well, really. And there's a few key words in this whole thing with regard to the recovery. Neil's used the word nimble. It's also in the report here, the word agile, which I fully agree with. But the third word that I'm going to throw in too is relationships. And this is a time to build relationships, not get bogged down over tenders, but build relationships to get on with the job, if you like.
Thank you. Councillor Tavendale.
Yeah, Mr. Jorgensen, it's probably a question you may not be able to answer, but I was just wondering whether you thought there was a possibility of the hospital rebuild being brought forward to create jobs in the region and getting contracts in place for us at the moment. Do you see that as being a way for us to minimise risk of us losing our skilled labour units?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure where the hospital, talking about the Dunedin Hospital rebuild is at and how that's affected by the process at the moment. There is quite a lot of discussion around how procurement might look moving forward, and there's certainly it's being suggested that tendering programs of works may be a better option for everybody in the future. So what that might mean is putting out a 3-year program for a particular type of work, which then means that contractors are committed to that and will resource that, and actually lowers the risk of suddenly the contracting resource not being available should it then be needed for the Dunedin Hospital, for example. So yeah, no, there is still quite a bit of thinking to do in that space, but I don't think that's quite upon us just yet. Yeah, I think the next 6 months or so is really about just stimulating our local economy and getting our contractors working while we're looking at those longer term risks and then how we mitigate that. But we'll certainly be looking at those programs of work, which would then help commit contracting resource to our region for a longer period.
Thank you. Councillor Hopkins.
Two questions. Neil, recommendation number 2, how would you respond to somebody, a local contractor, say, who accused us or wondered why we were seen to be or possibly seen to be playing favourites by giving $1 million to our own company? So we're looking after our own local company rather than having $1 million for all local companies, which would enable the money and the work to be shared around. So that's question 1. Question 2, with regard to 3 and eating into the depreciation reserves, would you anticipate that we would, or perhaps this is one for Paul, would we simply write that depreciation consumption of the reserve off and maintain depreciation rates at current levels, allowing for that, if you like, hole, so to speak? Or do you imagine us increasing the rate for depreciation to recoup that over future years?
So to answer to your first question, and Mr. Hope may wish to add to my answer, is it's entirely a governance decision or a political decision about whether or not you think it is appropriate to provide a set of funding to a company owned by the ratepayers or not. It is just I guess a suggestion from our team is that it is appropriate in these circumstances, but it's your call at the end of the day, and that's probably a discussion amongst yourselves as part of this report. The other item on depreciation reserves is that depreciation reserves are rated at a flat line, and they build up balance over time, and then sometimes they go into deficit over time. For example, the Waihemo Water Reserve at the moment is in a reasonably substantial deficit due to the relatively recent water upgrades we did. So there'd be no intention to write any of that money off, unless council specifically wished to. It would simply mean those reserve funds would be in a deficit should that happen until their annual contributions built it back up again over time. Remember, pipeline assets are a long-term game. Some of them can last 100, even 200 years. So that's the period of time they're funded over.
Sure. No, I get that. Yeah. No, thank you.
So Paul, did you want to add anything to that?
I mean, really, the only additional comment is that there is both an interest return and an interest charge on the balance in any of the depreciation funds. So it's anticipated that they would move in and out of funds between the charge and then the actual spend.
Yeah, the reason I asked the question is because this is a use of a depreciation reserve that wasn't anticipated. In other words, what we're doing is we've built up a reserve to pay for something that we know is going to happen, say, in 20 or 25 years' time. But we're dipping into it early for other purposes, in this instance, economic stimulus post-COVID. So that was why I asked if we would be increasing the rate, and I'm relieved to hear you both say we won't.
Yeah, no, I mean,
can we leave that for the debate? And so,
can I just make one comment though? Is the projects aren't being bought that forward early in the scheme of the lifetime, so it's not actually. Yeah, so just for purposes, not a debate, just for your information, is that the projects we're doing are not being brought forward that early in the lifetime of the asset. But that's all. Just
It says you're bringing them forward.
Councillor Newton. You're on mute still, Peter.
Seeking a resolution to utilise the 3.5 million as a total, because that's not clear to anyone. It's been discussed, but it's not clear in this document. Also, would there be additional need to borrow to offset depreciation or fund anything else? I'd just like to know the full picture going forward, if we're needing to borrow to fund depreciation, and whether we are looking at that 3.5 million as a total to be resolved during this discussion.
Yeah, no, we're not looking for the 3.5 million to be resolved. What we're saying is that's an indication of around what we think we might spend. It might be quite a bit less depending on the projects that progressed from the renewal space, what can actually get going, what the contractor resource can actually do, and what we can get ready, the complexity of the projects. There's quite a lot of factors that feed into that, and the part of our approved budgets and part of the activity management plans in many respects for some of those projects. So they're all part of asset management plans. So they putting a dollar limit is not particularly useful, because we don't actually know what that is at the moment. That's why the resolution is in there about the not going into more than 3 years depreciation deficit, which then gives that protection. So that's kind of the policy driver, if you like, is that we're not going to spend more than 3 years deficit on a particular area, and the bulk of our suppliers are actually in positive. So the work we're doing is all necessary work for the long-term lifetime of our assets, and to keep them operating at the level of service we want. It's just some of the work's just being brought forward a bit to ensure that we can stimulate the economy the best we can at this time. So it's really not that much of a significant blip in the life of the asset. Paul, do you want to add on to the second part?
If I could, the other part of that is that officers have reasonable delegations around expenditure, particularly around depreciation, spending depreciation. They don't have to come back to us unless it's over certain amounts on any individual tender. So that's the other part of that. Will they be bringing it back? Some of it they won't be, because they don't need to. We've already given delegation for that. Mr. Hope, did you have anything to add?
Look, it's quite clear, I think, over the next couple of years at least, that we will need to borrow externally to meet our cash flow requirements, both because of anticipated increased spend and potentially a reduction in income from particularly sort of user charges and other fees. So yes, we will be borrowing, but it doesn't really relate particularly to this individual project. It's more just to meet the overall cash requirements. Borrowing was approved in the long-term plan for a number of projects. It's just where it's really just a cash flow issue rather than the approval of the loan.
Councillor Wallstein.
Thank you, Mayor Kircher. Just a question that I think Councillor Hopkins posed, but I don't think it's been answered, is does the amount of money being spent on the renewal work increase the value of the asset and therefore incur further depreciation in the future, or increased depreciation in the future, or is it purely treated as a repairs and maintenance, and the value of the asset doesn't change?
Yeah, so no, that doesn't. It just maintains the level of service of the asset. So we're not improving the asset over what it was designed to originally do. So it's not in building in additional capacity as part of this that works. It's not spending money, it's not depreciation. So the valuation of the asset's actually done on what it costs to do repairs and maintenance or renewal work, if you like. So that if it costs $300 a metre, say, to replace a 300 diameter water main, then that's what the asset value is based on. So it's based on replacement cost over time. So that's what drives that, not whether it's a new asset or an older asset. It's actually on what it costs to replace it.
Thank you, Mr. Jorgensen. John, that just makes the point clear that this spending really has no immediate effect on the amount of depreciation that council has to cash fund. So that was the point I just wanted to clarify. So thank you, Neil.
Okay, looking for someone to move either the recommendation or otherwise. Councillor Kingan and then Councillor McRoby. Just are you moving as is, or?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to move the recommendations 1 through to 4.
And I'll second.
Okay, and narrowly beat Councillor Milmine on that one as well. Right, so any discussion? Councillor Tavendale.
Obviously, it's not something we can do in this time frame, but I think that a discussion around Whitestone really shows the need for our procurement policy to be looked at and including the local purchasing element to it, because I think that that's the bones of all this, that COVID-19's really highlighted the need for us to support local. And so if our procurement policy in the future can reflect that, that would be awesome.
Yeah, that's something we've been waiting 6.5 years for now, but yeah, and particularly to reflect that local element, you know, not and just reiterating that one, it's not about paying more to have someone local do something. It's about making sure the locals get a good chance at getting work within the Waitaki district. Shopping locally once again. Right. Any other comments, Councillor Hopkins?
Well, I'm just wondering, Mayor Kircher, Mr. Jorgensen said, look, $1 million to Whitestone, up to you. It's a political decision. We've just raised the idea and now we're letting you guys carry the can. You can throw $1 million at your company or the ratepayers company and leave everyone else out, or we can broaden the offer and include other organisations and entities. Or we might be able, given there's another $2.5 million, I don't know, in this of spending proposed, can we in some way frame a fifth recommendation that might enable some direct negotiation with local contractors, local and or appropriate contractors for the value of 2.5 million? I don't know. I'm trying to.
Can we? I've got a potential solution for that, but if we pass these ones, and then maybe a fifth one will read along the lines that we request officers to bring back a report on how other initiatives can be carried out benefiting local employment.
Well, perhaps other initiatives can be implemented to benefit local employment and local contracting firms or local firms. I mean, I think the key thing is that do we want to be seen to be offering?
Okay, well, look, we've got what we've got in front of us, so I think we've got enough to actually vote on that one, and but we'll just hear from Mr. Jorgensen first, waving away.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, that is just. To be clear, that is what the intention is for the rest of the funding, is negotiating with everybody else in the community. Sorry, I thought I made that clear at the start. That is what we are doing. So the point of the delegation, the whole point of number 1 is exactly what you've just said, is that negotiate directly and appoint contractors to do the work that's identified. So that's the whole nub of the basic bit of the report. The second part with Whitestone is just allocating a sum of that money to them, so they've got some certainty as the ratepayer owned company and the local company, as being said. So that the main gist of the report is actually the first resolution, which does what you say. We just didn't want to put a dollar amount in there because we're not actually quite certain what that dollar amount will be. But the whole point is enable us to be nimble, to actually just negotiate with our contractors and get the work underway at rates that we know are competitive and fair to everyone. So the whole point is
okay. I think
the whole contracting field.
We get that now. I don't think it was clear that we were talking about the broader context with that one. What I'd suggest then would be that to the mover and seconder, whether they're happy to add local in front, or sorry, Waitaki in front of the contractors on the first recommendation.
Yeah, I'd be happy to have that. Directly appoint local contractors. Is that what you meant?
Yeah, or Waitaki ones. Yeah, just to make sure we know what local means.
Yeah, can we clarify or define what that means? Like South Roads, is that Waitaki and local, for example?
Well, if in doubt, bring it to us. Be the thing. I mean, this is about in our making sure that our people have got work, and but it also covers making sure that it's a fair and fair price that we're getting work done for. So yeah, if you've got another suggestion, I mean, leaving it as just as contractors doesn't say anything about that it's going to be employing local people or anything. So it's we want, I think, better definition on that ourselves, but if saying that they need to be Waitaki, then if that's not enough, then I need a suggestion as to what would be.
Okay, what about employing local? How about employing Waitaki people?
Okay, councillors, thoughts on that? Councillor Hopkins. You're muted, Jim.
Waitaki people, that's very, very specific, and that doesn't allow for, I mean, I would have thought local might be a company with a significant employment, a workforce here, but also perhaps workforces elsewhere. And yeah, but the other thing, Neil, I believe we should actually have a figure in there. This whole project needs to have a cap of some description. People have talked about 3.5 million. So couldn't number one delegate say something to the effect that the authority is delegates to the CE authority to directly negotiate up to, for a sum up to 2.5 million or 3 million or whatever. We don't have to spend it all, but I believe we need to actually cap it, don't we?
Councillor Tavendale's raised a point of order.
Sorry.
We've got a movement on the table, and this is actually something that's outside of that. So I think it needs to be addressed in another motion rather than now.
Well, okay, but I still think, yep, fair point.
So the motion
if I may, Mr. Chair, I'll need to interrupt you. It's 10:14. We are going to go to a break at 10:15 automatically, so we may need to wrap this up and adjourn the meeting.
Chair, can we put this motion that we've had a mover and a seconder for then and see where it goes?
Well, yeah, we've got the motion currently is written, but with Waitaki in the first one. So can I have an indication of? Are you voting, Councillor Tavendale?
I was wanting to ask a question on it.
Okay, look, we will need to adjourn now, and we'll come back in 10 minutes. So thanks very much, everyone. And I think we're supposed to turn cameras off and go and have a cup of tea. controls. So welcome back, and we're still on the item regarding local purchasing, or what's not local purchasing. I just had a bit of an offline chat to Mr. Jorgensen and just asked him to perhaps comment on where things are at the moment with around expectations and understandings. Might not be ready to join us yet.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll go to, we'll take a question from Councillor Milmine and then Councillor Wallstein.
Mine's purely just around a wording suggestion. I think there's a lot of employers out there that benefit the Waitaki district without necessarily being based in the Waitaki. So I just want to suggest that perhaps we use the words that benefit the Waitaki economy, as opposed to being strictly just using the word Waitaki. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's fairly broad in some respects, but yeah, I mean that's the overall intent. It's
yeah,
benefiting the economy through local employment, usually, mostly, but yeah.
But what we were saying before was that we use that we employ a Waitaki company or a Waitaki contractor, but that is very different to saying someone that benefits the Waitaki economy. They're vastly different.
Right, Councillor Wallstein.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Kircher. Look, my feeling is that this resolution, as it stands, we all understand what it means, and I think all the wording that's been put forward, I'm not criticising in the slightest, but I do think that every wording that's been put forward is open to debate and open to interpretation. And I think we're just trying to complicate something which we know exactly what it means. And I'm sure the CEO and the executive management team also know what the intention is. And we should be able to trust them to apply that discretion and that understanding to ensure that any contractor who is employed, that there is a measure of benefit in employment of local staff, no matter where the contractor is based. Because taking South Roads, for example, South Roads is an Invercargill-based company, but has a branch here in Oamaru and a lot of staff employed in Oamaru, a direct benefit to the local Waitaki economy, the wider Waitaki economy, but it's not a Waitaki company. So, so I just think we don't need to make this too complicated. Let's leave it as it is. Everybody understands it, and let's just move on. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Jorgensen, are you back with us?
Yeah, sorry, it's back now.
Yeah. So I said just before, you and I had a quick offline discussion. So yeah, it's trying to find the right wording, but with any wording, there's you know, it's not defining things quite well enough. But can you tell us what your understanding would be a bit when we are talking about Waitaki contractors?
So it's essentially that a contractor that employs Waitaki people in some capacity. So our preference would be when doing our negotiations is negotiating.
Your audio's not going too well.
Okay. How about now? Yep. Gary's frozen, but yeah, I think everyone else seems to be able to hear me okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Yep. Must be
Yeah,
my
so
end.
the preference would be that we're you know, our first negotiation is with contractors that primarily employ Waitaki people, and then if we can't get them, then we do our usual negotiations with others. But most of the contractors we had thought of using for this work are Waitaki contractors, if you like, or have a base here, employ local people here, etc. Probably only the more specialised works where others may need to come in from out of region, e.g. Timaru or Dunedin.
Okay. Right. So Councillor Hopkins, Councillor Kingham. You're on mute, Jim.
Noting Councillor Wallstein's point and also accepting Councillor Milmine's suggestion, I think Mr. Jorgensen may have captured it for us. It certainly captured it for me. And if that number 1 read directly appoint contractors with a local workforce where officers are satisfied, that would seem to capture what we've been trying to talk about. But it's up to the mover and seconder to see if they would accept what is essentially Mr. Jorgensen's suggestion.
Councillor Kingham.
I was just going to exercise my right of reply, so I think I'll let Mel go first.
Yeah, Councillor Tavendale, thank you.
Just basically, I want us to think right back to the start of the reason why we're doing this, which is around agility. And I think that we've got staff that have told us what the intention is and how they go about it. I don't want us to throw too many hurdles in their way, because if we're saying if you're in doubt, come back to us, then all of a sudden the agility part of things is lost, and we've actually lost the main intention behind what we're doing today. So I just want us to be careful with that. And I thought the original recommendation that we had did cover what we needed it to cover, and I think our staff know what our intentions are behind that.
Okay. Councillor Kingham, you were right to reply.
Yeah, look, I think we're at a point where we could perhaps put this, because this is about sending a signal, really. I think we've talked about it. I mean, words is what we do, I know, but the big thing is to be able to get on with it, really, and preferably using the local guys. It's as simple as that.
Yep, agree. So I'm going to put the motion. So those in favour, can you please raise your hand? Those against? That's carried. Thanks very much, and we will have a good understanding of what's meant now. Right, now we've got... Yes, Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, you talked before about a need to, what possibility of having a separate motion relating to budgets, and I would like to move that the delegation of the Chief Executive to directly appoint contractors is capped at a maximum of $3 million. Do
we have a seconder? Can't see any seconder, so I think that lapses. Essentially, I think it's up to we're relying on staff to bring us back more information as time progresses about what's happening and where things are at. So we stay in good communication with them on these things, and it's going to be important that we understand where we're sitting around any spending. So they do have to report back, and that's going to be a pretty good mechanism to see how that expenditure is going. And I think that remains one of our roles is to oversee what is happening in the financial realm, and also in making sure that we're getting bang for our bucks as far as the local economy goes. So I think everyone's quite satisfied that the mechanism's already in place, Councillor Hopkins. So we're going to move on to the next item, which is to discuss the NOIC loan, and that's on page 107. We've got 3 members from NOIC joining us, so we're politely waiting in the Zoom waiting room for half an hour. So while we talked about that other matter, I just want to welcome Matt Ross, who's the chair of the board, Andrew Rodwell, who's the chief executive, and Stephen Craig Pearson, the commercial manager, along. So Mr. Hope, do you want to introduce this report? Sorry, before you do that, Mr. Hope, Councillor Kingham just wants to talk about his conflict of interest, I believe.
Yeah, look, I'll just have to declare a conflict of interest over this. You all know my enthusiasm for this company and what it's done, and I don't have an impartial mind. And I have a real bias, so I've got to unfortunately stand aside. Go for it, guys.
Thank you, Councillor King. Mr. Hope.
Yeah, so I won't talk about any of the aspects specific to the company because I believe Mr. Ross and his team can address that more specifically. From a council point of view, essentially this is an investment proposal to extend finance to an entity that council has had a long and mutually beneficial relationship with. We understand the security attached to that investment well. The level of return that we're proposing to negotiate would be well in excess of funding that council can secure, especially in the current environment. There's a near immediate benefit of a return of funds and an increase on the level of investment, the return on the investment, potentially starting at the start of the next financial year, 2 years earlier than we're anticipating. In addition to those very commercial reasons, there are also significant sort of secondary benefits to the wider community, including the prospect of providing a bit of stimulus and stability to one of the key industries that we will look to get the district through the current crisis. So I'm very happy to answer questions, but would, I suppose, if it's with the Mayor's permission, really pass it over to Mr. Ross and Mr. Rodwell to address the issue from the council company perspective.
So Mr. Ross, farmer outstanding in his field, I see. So welcome along, and yeah, what do you like to address the meeting, please?
Thank you very much, Mayor Kircher and councillors. Just checking you can all hear me okay. I'm beaming to you literally from rural North Otago. I'm relying on a series of technology off the back of the toolbox on the back of my ute out on the runoff. So it's all good. Thank you for the opportunity today to be here. I will let both Andrew, our CE, and Stephen comment on the specific detail. But for those councillors that haven't met with us before or seen us in our half and full year opportunities when we have a business review with council, the NOIC scheme itself, we've got 170 shareholders, an operating area in excess of 17,000 hectares at the moment, and I would say probably one of the largest pieces of modern infrastructure and asset in the rural community for our region. So the history of NOIC from 2006 through to now is significant. The council's part in that right through, so well before my time, and supporting the scheme to get going and established, and providing a financial stability as well as I would say a community endorsement has been huge factors in the success of the scheme. And that support, obviously, we're looking to commercialise more so than it has been. It's been done up until now. It's been done at a very attractive rate for the company. So there's two parts to the proposal, and that'll be commented on some more. But I think that council's endorsement since inception in 2006 has been significant, and it's not unnoticed by the whole wider community. So a continuation of that and a modernisation of the terms would be a very solid next step in the life of the scheme and in a significant community asset. So that introduces it, I think. So I'll hand over to, if that's all right.
Yep, no, that's fine. So perhaps if we just go straight to questions. So councillors, have you got questions, and then between our three guests, hopefully they can respond to those. So who would like to ask anything? Councillor Percival and Councillor Tavendale. Thank you.
Yes, through the chair, I'll probably refer this question to Mr. Rodwell. But firstly, as a representative of the rural community, I support this proposal, but I do have one question. I don't know if Mr. Rodwell has a copy of the meeting agenda document, Can that be confirmed or by Mr. Rodwell?
You haven't got a copy of the report? Okay, no.
No, well, okay. Well, for the rest of them, page 110, the last sentence in the second paragraph, it says the two largest risks were the level of subscription, but issuance of NOIC shares and the risk associated with large construction project. And it says there is now certainty about both of these issues. My question, I would like an explanation of the indicators that support the claim that there is now certainty on the two issues I've just mentioned from that sentence.
Yeah,
Have I made that clear? Sorry.
No, I'm very happy to do that. Well, I guess the second one is the easy one to answer, because the construction program is completed. It was completed a couple of years ago, and as with these major infrastructure contracts, there is a sunset period, if you like, for a while, where it's an opportunity for any issues that arise in the scheme to be identified, and the contractor, in our case McConnell Dowell, remained and does in fact remain on the hook for any substantive issues that might arise in the scheme. The reality is that we're seeing way fewer issues arising than we'd expected. And so to that extent, we're happy to endorse the statement that you've just read out in regard to risk around the scheme itself. That's not to say, of course, that a piece of infrastructure that is large and complex and physically extensive, covering really an area of, whilst it's irrigating 17, 18 hectares, it's actually covering an area of 65,000, is not going to be prone to issues. But we manage those in a very professional manner with a repairs and maintenance program that keeps everything absolutely running as smoothly as it possibly can. Just remind me, if you would, the first bit of the question of risk was to do with.
Well, am I still on here? Yes, it was to do with the take up of the remaining shares in stage 2, which there appears to be quite, well, I wouldn't say resistance, but not what was expected by the company or by us as a major lender. It was quite disappointing, and it also affects the fact that of you obtaining outside funding from traditional agencies. What is the thing was, I couldn't understand how there was certainty with the level of risk on the subscription uptake. So that's
yeah, sure. Look, and a fair point. I mean, we prepared an information memorandum in the middle of 2019, which we put out to our shareholder base. We've got about 2,500 shares out of 20,000 shares that have not been taken up or had not been taken up at that time. Of those, we have confirmed uptake of, I think, 355, but that's fewer than we might have hoped. And there were a number of reasons, I think, for that. You'll appreciate that the banking environment has taken a pretty restrictive approach to investment in the primary sector, or had taken a restrictive approach to investment in the primary sector. They were unwilling to loan to farmers, not so much on the share purchase, but on the infrastructure that farms would need to put in place on their farms to expand their irrigation footprint. And that, the drivers for that, of course, are reasonably widely understood. But most of the banks are Australian. There was the capital ratio requirements that the Reserve Bank placed on the banks, and that gave them a degree of nervousness. There was also, of course, the concerns that of overexposure to their investment and balance sheets for farms in the primary sector. Of course, the world has moved considerably in the last few months. and a quite different attitude to the agricultural sector has emerged. Whether that's a sustainable attitude, I don't know, but we do feel that there is a greater level of confidence now, both by banks and by farmers, to invest. But I think it's really important to understand there are a couple of catchments within the NOIC command area, which at the moment, some of the farms in those catchments are drawing water from consents, the natural flows, consistent with the approach to the environment from the government and regional councils. Some of that capacity is going to be restricted, and those farms almost certainly will need to take advantage of NOIC water, which presently flows past their properties in pipes in lieu of reduced takes out of the natural flows from those rivers.
Thank you.
Councillor Taverner.
Thank you. A couple of questions, but the first one being, I take your point on the share sales being likely in the future because of certain rule changes and whatnot. But what is the company's ability to pay if the share sales don't actually happen?
Right, so the ability to pay, we've got, I'll start this one, Stephen may wish to speak to it as well, but we have retained earnings of our own, which we are able to utilise to meet debt obligations if we need to. And secondly, our primary financer would step in. But as we've noted in, I think, the Chair's letter to the Council, the consequences of utilising our primary lender to finance the repayment in full of the Council loan in 2022 would be a change in terms which would be disadvantageous for the company and ultimately, therefore, for the shareholders. In short, that bank would use the opportunity to squeeze a bit more for themselves, and of course that's not in our interests, it's not in our shareholders' interests, it's not in the community's interests.
Thank you.
Could I just add a little, apologies, Mayor Kircher.
Yep, no, mate, go for it.
A little bit to that, insofar as remember that the existing scheme, while there is some surplus shares available, there is 17 in excess of 17,000 existing shareholders. One of the biggest impediments to funding this type of infrastructure is that we've established it, designed it, built it, and installed it for, you know, probably somewhere between a 50 and a 100-year lifespan. So conventional funding models and the current banks, for example, they want debt amortization across the life of a 20-year loan. So, you know, large-scale infrastructure like this, it needs to have funding and financing and support in the form of the way it's used, funded, everything consistent with the lifespan of the asset. And if you look at a lot of the aging infrastructure, you know, that was built in the 60s and 70s by the Ministry of Works at that time, they more or less gave those assets away to communities, and some of that infrastructure is needing to be re-established now. And so you have this huge capital cost to get started. And so it's just the two things are a slight disconnect. So there's still a big pool of existing shareholders which the burden ultimately lies on and falls with, and we're obliged to deal with that as the farmer shareholders of the scheme now. However, the longer term nature of this type of asset is we need to match the way it's funded and owned and operated consistent with the life of the asset, so that you effectively pay your way for your time that you own shares in that infrastructure. So that would be a far better alignment for the asset itself and for its use.
Thank you. Councillor Hopkins.
Sorry, can I just finish with one more quick question? Is that okay?
So, yeah, I'm really worried that Councillor Wolstein's going to get RSI or something, holding his hand up so long. So I have seen you, Councillor Wolstein and Councillor McRovey. So we will get to you. So, Councillor Taverner.
Just the last question is on the repayment terms. I see 10 million to be repaid on a scheduled basis, which is essentially when the shares are sold, I understand. How does the interest get paid on that? Is that happening along the way? And if shares aren't being sold, are we still going to be getting some minimum payment back to us, or is it going to essentially be the whole, it could be potentially a fair bit more owing at the end? Just want to understand that better.
Is Mr. Hope best to answer that, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, really the proposal that was put forward by the company, and one that has been supported in the recommendation, is that the $15 million amount that it would be paid down to would be split into two pieces. So the $10 million piece would be repaid by regular repayments on a schedule that would be agreed between council and the company to really match both of our cash flows. The second $5 million piece, that would be the only piece that would be subject to repayment from share sales, with a term no longer than 10 years. But as indicated in the letter from the company, their expectation is that that would be pretty much, their estimate at the moment is that that would be repaid within 5 years. The interest will be calculated and invoiced probably on our current arrangement, which is quarterly, and certainly won't be building up across the year or anything like that. So it would be regular inflows into council, and the only irregular amount being based on the share sales, and then we'd recalculate the interest on that $5 million piece really as each of the share sales will return to council.
Thank you, Mr. Hope. Right, this time. So I've got Councillor Hopkins, Councillor Wallstein, Councillor McRoby, and Councillor Milmine in that order.
Yeah, I've got a question for Matt, Stephen, or Andrew, and by implication, I think, following on from that one from Paul. It seems to me what you said about the sale of shares. Yes, you've sold 17,500, and so you've got 2,500 left to go of the 20,000. I was going to ask you if you had a plan B, but in response to Councillor Tavendale, you guys seem to have said we don't need a plan B. It's a 100-year infrastructure project. We will sell the shares. The question, however, remains, and it's a $5 million question because that's the amount that's going to be repaid to us subject to sale of shares. Do you have a plan B? Are you looking at, for instance, reducing the fixed costs per hectare, which I've been told have dissuaded some people from buying farm properties in the southern areas of the district, or reducing share prices, or anything of that nature? I mean, what do you do if those 2,500 shares remain stubbornly unsold?
Who wants to answer that?
Well, that's
Mr.
probably
Ross,
Matt, Andrew, yeah,
or Mr. Rodwell?
I'm happy to make a small start, and I'm sure Andrew will have something to add. So, in terms of in the first instance, we can't control the timing of that. We're acutely aware of the need to sell the shares, because ultimately that drops our running costs. And so you refer to the fixed running costs as perhaps a dissuasion for additional shares. One of our best opportunities is to sell the remaining shares, and we've got the ability to drop our fixed running costs by a significant magnitude. It could be $100 to $125 per hectare per year, assuming all other things remain the same. So that's significant on our current running costs. In saying that, to shift water through modern infrastructure, we would be one of the more reasonably priced schemes on the eastern coast of the South Island. So if you look at some of the more modern infrastructure projects further north, their cost to operate will be every bit as much as ours, and they will have different mixed ownership models, so they don't necessarily own 100% of that infrastructure. So as a farmer, I'm less concerned about that as a reason not to or as an impediment to the sale of the rest of these shares. There's enough activity in our region and enough other things that will transpire with Andrew referred to before, regional planning, review of consents, minimum flows in some of our catchments in our area, that will have an influence over the shares. So I'm personally not concerned about how and when they will sell. And we can't influence the timing of that other than to say we will always stay creative. We're acutely aware of the need to move those on because the longer term benefits to the scheme in this community are significant. So we will always keep exploring avenues to do that, but not in such a way that we compromise our values or the financial commitments, either in terms of share price or made by the people that set this in motion and before 2006. So we won't compromise those values. We're a cooperative scheme owned by ourselves, and so we won't discount or anything like that on the way to the end to get that last bit sold, because that makes no sense. That compromises who we are. So in short, the answer is yes. I'm confident we'll sell the shares. It will need some time. We're not going to be waiting 100 years to do that. I would think that we won't need too many shifts in 3 or 4, I suppose, situations locally that we'll get to the stage where FOMO will kick in, I believe, and actually we'll find that you could have probably sold twice as many shares of that when the time comes.
So, Paul, can I just ask Paul, $5 million in these recommendations, it says specifically $5 million is to be repaid by the end of the term, primarily funded by the proceeds of the issuance of shares by NOIC. So what's our plan B? What if Matt comes back and says, yeah, we'll sell the shares, but we haven't sold them yet. Ergo, we don't have $5 million in share sales to give. What's our plan B?
Sorry, there isn't a plan B. The commitment from the company is that at the end of the 10-year period, the amount will be repaid. It will have had a further 10 years to amortise our loan and the other provider of finance, and so it will be looking at a significantly different position. I suppose from my perspective, looking at that share sale risk, that's only 100 shares for each of the next 10 years to achieve that amount. In roundabout terms, a share is worth $5,000. There's no requirement to sell the full 2.5. It's a requirement to sell 1,000, and that is 100 a share, 100 per year is not a significant sale.
Thank you.
Stephen, you want to add something? No, you're on mute still.
If I could just add, please, for Councillor Hopkins, by the time the $10 million has amortised down to $5 million, Councillor, in 10 years' time, the company will have repaid a total of $20 million of debt, and would just need to be at that point, it would be in a much stronger position to go back to the banking market and refinance away the last $5 million. So that's our plan B. We would still intend to honour the commitment to the council to repay that $5 million in full.
I guess if you look at the current climate with interest rates, there's probably a lot of people out there that would be quite keen to put some of their money into something like this as dry shares, even just to get the investment back, or the interest rate back, at a time where it's very difficult to earn much money at all with any investments in banks. So anyway, look, we'll move on to Councillor Wallstein next.
Thank you, Mayor Kircher. It's been a long time. I was just about forgotten what I was going to ask. But anyway, no, I was just going to say that just reading the report, I read there's currently 163 shareholders, and the comments from advised already that there'll be more shareholders will join when the old water consents expire from those streams, rivers that have been over allocated in the past. And I note the shares available have got a value of about 12.975 million if they're at $5,000 per share. So there's a lot of value in those shares to be sold over the next period. But my question is, I've got two questions. My first question is, do the members of NOIC, can anybody advise when those old water rights are going to expire and when those present water consent holders may well have no option but to purchase NOIC shares? So that's my first question. So perhaps a response to that, please.
Andrew, you're on mute.
Thank you. Yes, the answer is that the primary river involved is the Kakanui. The consents roll off over the next, or become up for renewal over the next 3 to 5 years. The quantum of shares that we've estimated, bearing in mind that it is, whilst the Kakanui River is scientifically regarded as 6 times over allocated, it is likely that there will be some allocation left for farms to take. But the mathematics that we've done would indicate about 800 to 1,000 shares will be available from the Kakanui in that 3 to 5 year window, as and when the council adjusts the flows required. Now, that's not certain, none of that is certain, but it doesn't, it would be a great surprise if, given the current environmental climate, that trajectory wasn't followed. In other words, the river wasn't adjusted for, and those farms who have invested in high productivity systems are going to have to substitute their water. So as again, our estimation is the 800 to 1,000 share mark. But there are a number of other initiatives, I might add, that we can't disclose, but we are aware of, that give us a high degree of confidence around the sale of shares. Again, we can't provide you with certainty around it, but given we've sold 17.5, we've got 2.5 to go, and the sort of environment that Matt described, we're pretty confident that those shares will sell.
Thank you, Andrew. That's very reassuring, because I'm sure they will sell over that period of time. So my second question is security. Currently, council has pari passu, or equal security, with the main lender. And if there was a change in lender in the future, council may have to revert back to being a second ranking security with NOIC. And my only question there is that would, in my mind, create a reason for an increase in the rate of interest payable on the council loan. So have NOIC funded into their ongoing calculations the possibility of having to pay a higher rate of interest on the money which is being loaned to NOIC by Waitaki District Council?
I see I'm not on mute, so I'll kick it off, but Stephen is probably best to answer it. Yeah, the short answer, Councillor, is yes. We have recognised that in going to second tier security, which is not actually materially different actually in practice, but Stephen can explain that. In doing so, we recognise that we'd be subject to a higher risk margin than we would otherwise have on first priority, and so we have factored that into our forecast and our anticipated costs.
Thanks, Matt.
Stephen.
That's exactly right. I've nothing really to add. Councillor Wilstein, Andrew summarised it well. Obviously, there is a technically greater risk, although of not a great substance, and of course the company will expect that there'll be an additional margin for that.
Right, thank you.
Right, on to Councillor McRoby.
Partly answered my question, Mayor. Thank you guys for coming in today. But look, this is, as Paul suggested, this is a clear investment proposal for council to consider. And in my view, I looked at risk, which involves interest rates, and you just covered that off. And there is an independent advisor, I think, on the interest to be paid, and that would take into account should our security lower or increase, whatever it might be. Security looks to me to be fine. Two questions I have, though, on your financial position and your ability to repay the $2 million once we negotiate this. So I'm assuming that you have cash reserves in excess of $2 million at the moment. Would that be correct?
Yes.
Okay, so that would raise the question with me then to say, could you repay 4 million?
No.
Could you pay 3 million?
I don't know if we're in an auction situation. Quite
well, we're being asked to make a decision on whether the loan be reduced by 2 million, and I'm trying to determine whether it could be reduced by, say, 3 million, given the company's financial position. Just a question.
Councillor, what we try to do is maintain a cash liquidity situation, if you like, that is suitably balanced for potential major events which might occur. And bearing in mind that the infrastructure is got a current valuation in order of about $155 million. And notwithstanding that a lot of that is pipe work under the ground, there is an awful lot of other equipment which unexpectedly could, shall we say, go bang. And so what's very important is that we are conservative, prudent, and that we retain cash reserves sufficient to meet those obligations as and when they occur, particularly should they occur at the same time as it happens to be a year where the volatility in agricultural returns might be at the lower point. So we wouldn't want to be turning around to our shareholders and lifting charges to meet capital obligations for equipment replacement at those times. And so we try to maintain a cash balance which is satisfactory and which we're confident will meet those. So to answer your question, could we do 3? Well, yes, but that puts us into that space where it becomes a little bit uncomfortable and we'd prefer not to be.
Okay, look, I accept that. I will be supporting a proposal. And so, look, thank you, Andrew, for your comments. Much appreciated.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Milmine.
Thank you. My question purely is just one for clarity. And I'm hearing everyone's confidence at the ability to repay in the future, etc. But I guess the biggest concern that all of us have is about the level of risk. And I'd just like, in really simple terms, an indication of what, with all the knowledge that you have and all the expertise that you have in this area, what level of risk do you think that this investment, continuation of this investment, poses for our ratepayers?
Well, if I try to look at this absolutely objectively, which you've asked us to do, I would say that the level of risk for the ratepayers is relatively low, and the reason for that is that our commercial arrangements with our shareholders provide the company with incredible security. We have encumbrances over land which give us first-ranking security in the event that a farm, for example, were to go into receivership. So we are first cab off the rank, Councillor. And to that end, and this happens because not all farmers are really good farmers. Some farmers are not good farmers and some farms fail. We have never, despite all that, we've never had a bad debt. So our ability to secure charges which are owed to us is extremely high. We have got enormous legal protections, almost along the lines that the council would have with respect to its rates. And so we're not blasé about that, but that does give us huge authority, if you like, and it means that we can meet our debts as and when required. Now, the risk really is if the primary sector was to fall over completely and our farms all disappeared. So I guess that's where the risk is. It's not really with the North Otago Irrigation Company per se. It is with the broader agricultural community, and there's no evidence that that's going to happen.
Thank you, Andrew. Councillor Wallstein and then Councillor Newton.
Oh, thank you, Mayor Kircher. No, I just was wishing to move the resolutions on page 107.
I'll take that as a notice motion. I'll just go to Councillor Newton first.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Kircher. I'm just wondering, in relation to Councillor McRoby's question regarding repayment of principal, is there an option to reduce the term of the loan versus repaying principal, i.e. 7 years instead of 10 years? Is that possible?
So who wants to answer this? Andrew?
Well, all things are possible, I guess. Yes, I appreciate that. I think I'd prefer to refer to Matt Ross's comments about the longevity of this scheme. I mean, this is this has been built, and we maintain a strategic vision for the scheme, which includes a very sophisticated sort of asset management program around it that is an 80 to 100 year vision. And so our preference is to think about terms on loans in that context. So rather than scrunch them up and for no sort of particular advantage, we'd prefer to look at things in the longer term. If the council determined that for its needs a shorter term was necessary, that's something we'd have to live with. But our preference is the proposal as it stands.
So
Okay,
that would be.
I think. Excuse me, Councillor Newton. Stephen just wants to add comment to that as well.
If I could please, just to come to Councillor Newton's specific point, why 10 years? NOIC did go to the banking market last year, and we had some pushback on a number of fronts. And the reason for the 10 years is that it's a number, but also it's a statement. And when it comes from the council, it brings real credibility around confidence in the scheme, having been such a long-standing and beneficial supporter for the scheme with knowledge of how we work. Also, it brings a sort of an implicit support for how the company operates environmentally with the farmers and the sustainability of their business into the future. And it just lends a real credibility and in terms of the term and the outlook going forward. As Andrew said, we could live with a shorter term, but it's really around the council brings its reputation and its knowledge and credibility. What we have suffered from is a lack of awareness around North Otago agriculture and the region of itself when we're dealing with the lending community. When you go into the finance community with somebody who's serious and is long-term and is thinking long-term, and they're saying, yes, we're there for 10 years, it really adds value to us. It smooths the negotiation, it brings a level of confidence, and it opens doors, frankly.
Understandable. Appreciate that. The second part of my question, I suppose, was in relation to the outstanding 5 million at the end of the 10 years. Obviously, the share sale. Would it be a expectation that council fund that for another 10 years if that were an option? Given, I'm talking about 10 years in the future now, so that we're tied in for another 10 years, or would you looking at alternative measures at that point in time?
If I could answer that, please. By then, Councillor, we'll have had 10 years of amortising council debt and amortising the senior lending debt that we're going to negotiate with the banking community, probably with the ASB, but possibly with others. By then, we'll have reduced our total debt by $20 million, and we'll have shown a really long, strong history since the project was completed. Having spoken to people in the debt markets, our advisors, the professional view is that we'd have the plan A at that point would be that we would have a pretty good case to make that we could go back to the commercial banks, say, look, here's 5 million. It's come to the end of the council term, but we've got this good history. Total debt is now down by 20, and the advice that we've got is that 5 million would be commercially funded at that point.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay. Right. Councillor Wolf, Councillor McRoby, have you got another question?
No, I'd just like to move Councillor Wallstein's motion. Seconded, I should say.
So, Councillor Wallstein, you happy to move that now?
Yes, I'm very happy to move that. The resolutions, recommendations, Mayor Kircher, numbers 1 to 4. I think the explanations we've been given by NOIC have settled any concerns that I had. I think we are dealing with a very professional board of directors, and companies run very professionally. So I think we have. I personally have confidence in the projections that are made, and the debts I'm sure will be able to be repaid in time. So as a result, I'm very happy to move the recommendations.
Right. So the recommendation as written, moved by Councillor Wallstein, seconded by Councillor McRoby. So further discussion on that. Councillor Hopkins.
Oh, sorry. Forget it. Don't worry.
Okay. I'll just add my 2 cents worth. As this relationship goes back many years now, and and I think even pre-NOIC days when there was irrigation north of Otago, which I was involved in, trying to sort out whether it was going to be the downland scheme or the gravity scheme. A lot of water has gone up the hill since that time, and we definitely have a vastly increased economy because of that. As far as an investment goes, on behalf of our ratepayers, we are making a margin over and above what we would be able to, what it's going to cost us. And I think at a time like this, it's actually going to be something that's reasonably appreciable. And there will be doubters out in the community, but hopefully we've all got enough facts from today and previously to understand and be able to explain to people why, if we do agree to the current motion in front of us, why we've done that and what the benefits are for the people of Waitaki. So I'm just going to go to Councillor Tavendale and then Councillor Halalele.
Thank you, Mayor Kircher. I'll be voting to support this today because I think at the moment we could have our money invested in a number of ways. It could be in the bank, which would be a much lower interest rate for us, so we wouldn't be making our ratepayers the return that we are on things currently, and obviously we're looking at going to a higher rate of return as well. I also think that if we just said now no and go and find some other funding to get you through this time, we're also not showing any support or confidence in our agricultural industry. And I think the issue with that is, like, we're in a time where a fair number of our industries are all struggling, in our retail and our tourism industry. There's so many areas that are struggling with COVID-19. We don't need to throw any more pressure on our community right now. And I think showing that we can support it in a way that's actually going to earn a higher level of interest for our ratepayers it's a win-win situation, and I think it's a really positive one.
Thank you. Councillor Halalele.
Cool, thank you. I was just going to mirror what Councillor Tavendale has said. I think in light of COVID-19 recovery process, I think the nation will be very heavily reliant on the agriculture farming sector. So I think in terms of risk management, I think they will be mitigated very well, and there are social benefits as well that will benefit the rest of the community. So yeah, I'm in support of this. Thank you.
Okay, I think we can put the motion now. So can those who are in favour please raise your hand? Those against? That's carried, and noting Councillor Kingham's abstention on that item. Thank you very much. Thank you Matt, Stephen and Andrew for your participation in the meeting and for your good work out in the community. So all the best, and yeah, hopefully life goes on well for you and your respective bubbles as we go into level 2. So thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, councillors. Can I just add that should any councillor ever have any questions at any time about the scheme or our activities in the scheme, please don't hesitate to make contact with us. Our door is always open, and we run a pretty transparent environment. So we look forward to hearing any thoughts or answering any questions as and when appropriate.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, councillors. So we'll now move on to page 117 and move to the quarterly financial report, which Mr. Hope will no doubt introduce.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Wells, he's still loitering in the background, so he might want to make some comment. Even though this is to the end of March, I think we'll all think this seems like a long time ago. This report was really prepared before the impact of the crisis, and particularly the financial impact, which sort of happened in April and is continuing to occur in May. We've got one of our first sort of big tests coming up, which will be the due date for instalment 4 of the rates. So we will inform you of how that goes and the feedback we get from the community as that payment date comes and passes. You've already made the decision not to charge penalties on that instalment, which I'm sure will be welcomed by a lot of people. And then the officers will be working very hard to make sure anyone that contacts us can put a suitable payment arrangement in place. In terms of the report itself, at the time we were travelling on pretty well. There were some variances noted in the report, but the overall position was strong, which really does mean we are well set up for whatever we have to face over the coming 12 to 24 months. We're doing a detailed review of the impact and what it may mean for the coming year, and we'll want to report that to as soon as possible. But really this report is a little historic now, but very happy to answer any questions about it.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Wells, do you have anything to add to it at the moment, or would you just go straight to questions?
I think that probably just straight to questions. As Paul said, this is historic and also was prepared under lockdown level 4. So the normal avenues of achieving accurate accruals were not all available at the time. So it's historic. It may not be as accurate as it would normally have been, and we'll now look to the future, I guess, to see what that holds.
Good as gold. So councillors, perhaps if we try and work through this in a bit of order so that we're not jumping all over the place. So if have we got anything on, say, pages 120 to 124, Councillor Hopkins?
Yes, I have, but Mick, I also have a question on, a couple of questions on the first 2 pages, 117 and 118, if you'll allow me to ask.
Yeah. Sorry, jumping ahead. Yeah.
Paul, you say this is historic, but the Appendix A shows an operating deficit of 3.652 million. That's $250,000 higher than budget, and and clearly by the end of the year, given what's happened since this report was written, it's going to be higher than that, isn't it?
Yes, it will be.
Okay, so it's not just a matter of we then have to decide how significant an issue that is for us and our ratepayers. Equally, on that first page, the annual cost of depreciation is likely to be about 900,000, nearly $1 million over budget. Are we going to rate for that? What's going to happen there?
The practice in the past is that the year in which the change occurs is just absorbed into any reserves, and then it's reflected in the coming year budget, which is what we have done already. So no, there is no requirement to fund that change in a single year once it's once the rates have been set.
And just, Mika, just very quickly, the next page, capital expenditure. Some of these figures I simply don't understand. You've said that the water expenditure total of 2.67 million is under forecast by 2.5 million. So I presume that means the total water budget for the period is 4.5 mil. Is that right?
Yes.
4.6. Yep.
4.6, and more than half of that hasn't been spent.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and the explanations there, Councillor Hopkins, and you know the Oamaru water reservoir being a major one,
that's fine.
which has been delayed that little bit, but it's underway now.
Yeah, no, I can see that. But you move down to parks and recreation. There's the budget showing that we spent 660,000.
There might be a mistake on this.
Pardon?
I think there's a mistake on this one.
Is under forecast by 510 million, and I'm assuming that's 5.1 mil. But are we saying that the Parks and Rec budget is 5.7?
No, it should be 0.51 million. It's a typo on my part, I'm afraid.
So where's the typo? Under forecast by point.
It should be under forecast by 0.51.
So thank you, Ian. Thank you very much.
Sorry about that.
We'll change the M to a K. Right. Well spotted. It's a big increase in the budget, that's for sure. Councillor Wallstein.
Thank you, Mayor Kircher. I was just going back to page 117 and the point Councillor Hopkins raised regarding depreciation. Just to enlarge on the point for the benefit of those people who are watching this videocast of council, is that council has to revalue its assets every 3 years on a rolling basis, and then is required to calculate depreciation and cash fund that depreciation. This is a requirement put on local government by central government. So therefore the requirement to actually put more money into our depreciation reserves is something that council has to, as already explained, has to actually eventually rate for. And it's an item that the local council, Waitaki District Council, has no control over at all. So when people often accuse council of not controlling its expenditure and rating far too much, this is an example of where council has no option. We are required by law to rate to cover these items. And whether we like it or not, that's an increased amount to be paid, added to the rates charged to ratepayers in years to come. So at this point, it's 900,000, which will be absorbed this year, as Mr. Hope has explained. But in the next year, it will not be absorbed. It'll be added to the rates. So ratepayers, that's something that you have to accept, that council has no control. So thank you for that, Mayor Kircher.
Thank you, Councillor Wallstein. Right, any further questions through to page 124?
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, just on page 120, I'm wondering why commercial rentals are under budget by 193,000.
Who's able to answer that one?
Is it? I mean, because that's clearly
Mr. Wells. Mr. Wells. Sorry, Jim. You just got to wait for people to unmute, and they'll answer. So.
Sorry. So, having prepared this report by remote control, I didn't or wasn't able to make all the normal inquiries that I would have made in order to provide a more detailed explanation. I haven't made those inquiries since. I'm hopeful that will come right. over the next few months. But other than that, I can't make any further comment or be of further assistance on that one.
Okay, so we'll get more information once you have it, obviously.
I would hope so.
Then on the next page, looking again at the where, those costs that appear to be out of kilter a little as against prediction, the refurbishment of the gallery and museum is showing plus 373,000. So is that a budget blowout of 373,000 over budget? Is that what you're saying? That it's gone 373 over budget?
So this is related to the mould remediation plus the work associated with that and doing up the museum, but not capital expenditure. And yes, it was unbudgeted, and council was basically forced into the position of having to do it, as I understand it.
So we never had a budget for it. So essentially, what you're saying is that's what was spent on it, not so it's exceeded a budget, but the budget was zero, so to speak.
So council has approved funding for it, but that has never been put into the budget. It wasn't ever part of the original budget, which is what we're measuring here.
It's measuring against what we agreed last June for the spending for the year, but we've since seen approved this other funding. Okay. Right. Anything else up to page 124?
Hang on. I think just let me double check. Would you please? Yeah. Oh, yes. On one. Sorry. Yes. On one. Apologies. 124, Ian. Total funds year on year. The graph with the 5 colours. The way that graph appears, every year our total funds have gone down.
Yes, and that's what we've reported to you. Every quarterly Treasury report has indicated that that's the case. We've moved from having $17 million in funds held in investments to the point where we've now borrowed, as of today, $8 million. So it's a major turnaround due to works that we have undertaken of a capital nature. Also things like the refurbishment of the museum that's been brought forward, the gallery, mould remediation, bringing forward the reservoir, and also lending money to support Kuro Duntroon irrigation, and now more recently the hospital company. A lot of this stuff was not budgeted, but has been reactive rather than being planned.
But those borrowings are largely internal, aren't they? I mean, we've borrowed against our own depreciation reserves.
No, we have $8 million borrowed against our Carl facility, the facility that was approved by council about a year ago.
As you'll recall, basically we're borrowing money at a lower rate than what we've got it invested out. So we're still a net investor. We've still got more money out than we have borrowed, but that's benefiting the ratepayer by earning a margin on that. So, and as we move towards joining the local government fund, that'll increase that margin because we're able to borrow money even more cheaply and loan it out to likes of NOICL that we just agreed to. So it's important that we have that margin. It's making more money for the ratepayer than if we just had paid those accounts along the way and had the rest of the money sitting in the bank. So that's the net benefit, which should be aware of. Anyway, well, Councillor Newton, you did have your hand up. You're still wanting to ask something? No. Yep.
Yeah, I was just wanting to know the total funds that Jim referred to, obviously that doesn't include funds that we have lent per se. So therefore, there's no offset to say, okay, we've got $17 million lent out and we owe 8. So therefore we're 9 up. Would that be correct?
Yes. So what this shows is our current cash position. It doesn't show our investments in NOIC or the Observatory Hill or any of our other longer term investments. This is purely cash position.
Okay. That's fine. That's all I needed to know. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wallstein.
Yeah, just thank you, Mayor Kircher. Just to comment, yeah, I was just going to make the point that that's purely cash in the bank, it excludes investments. But going back to the top of page 123, second paragraph, however, as council has no funds available for establishing bank deposits, in other words, our money is all loaned out and we are now a borrower, continuing low rates are a bonus. So it's a good time for council to change from being a body holding a pile of money in investments, earning very little interest, to now putting the money out to work in the community and instead borrowing money at very cheap rates from other financiers. So it's just very prudent financial management by council. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor McRoby.
Yeah, look, I'd support that, Chair. Thank you. If you look at page 122, that does give you the net asset position, and that's a much better document to look at than just where the actual cash is. So as at the end of March, our net assets were budgeted at 841 million, and we've got 865. So that's a document that I would use quite regularly. So just supporting Colin's comments as well. I'm feeling quite comfortable and relaxed about that position at the moment.
Okay, just be mindful, we've still got quite a bit more to get through, council, so if we can try and just speed things up a little bit more. So moving on to pages 125 through to 129. Nobody? No, just kidding. Councillor Hopkins.
Very quickly, the Maoraki wastewater loan, 915,000. We haven't determined yet how that's going to be repaid, have we? That matter's been, we agreed to raise a loan, but
it's currently sitting as a rate in the Meraki sewer charge, and if there's going to be a change, then it has to be within the annual plan, but otherwise it'll be getting charged as it normally would in the next year. At the moment, it means that the Meraki sewer rate stays very similar to what it's been, because they finished paying off one loan and this would be a new one. Just ask Mr. Wells or Mr. Hope just to correct me if I got any of that wrong. No,
that's correct. But it is a matter that you have highlighted that we need to just do a wee bit more work on to provide you further assurance as part of the annual plan debate.
Thank you. And the same applies to OHAL, doesn't it?
OHAL there won't be any servicing cost on that because it's still a developing scheme, and we don't charge the servicing component till it's completed and the loan's finalised.
Understand. Understood.
Okay. Anything else on that report, Councillor Percival?
Yeah, through the chair to Mr. Wells. As you're aware, Ian, your quarterly reports are always a highlight of our meetings, and you'll also be aware that we read and digest with massive interest. Is there anything in this latest report that we may have missed and you would like to highlight?
No, I think that you've probably cut to the chase, and I can always do with compliments like that. I value your questions. I apologise for any typos. It was prepared under duress, I must say, with the isolation prohibiting some of the normal activities that I would have engaged in to provide greater accuracy. It is what it is, though. I don't think there's anything that I would want to bring to your attention other than what has already been done so.
Thank you very much, and yeah, well spoken,
Thank you.
Councillor Percival. Would someone like to move that we receive the information, please? Councillor Hopkins and Councillor Wallstein. Thank you. So I'll just ask for a show of hands. Those in favour, please say aye, or please raise your hands. And those against, that is carried. Thank you. Right, we now move on to the next item, which is on page 130, and regarding sale of endowment land. So just for the benefit of those watching, we have two parts to this report. One is about the general agreement or otherwise about selling a bit of land. The other part is about the terms for that sale, so that if there is agreed that the land be sold, then the terms for sale are kept confidential within a public excluded part of the meeting, because obviously we don't want to disclose any particular terms before a negotiation is carried out. So anyway, I'll hand over to Mr. Jorgensen as the Group Manager responsible for the Property Department.
I think you've already covered it, Mr. Mayor. The purpose of the report is just simply, as you stated, just to alert the public that this matter has been considered later in the agenda.
Okay, any questions, comments, or questions first for Councillor Newton, then Councillor Kingham?
Sorry, no question. I was just going to move that. So we know it and receive.
Councillor Kingham?
Yeah, I too was going to speed things up for you.
Okay, so moved Councillor Newton, seconded Councillor Kingham. You can still take questions if you want, but anyone want to speak to that? Okay, those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against, and that is carried. Thank you very much. Well done. Moving on to Assets Group report on page 133, and just invite Mr. Jorgensen again to speak to his report and then take any questions.
Sure. Again, there's been quite a bit of reporting back of sort of more detailed activities to elected members through the COVID event, and really the purpose of this report is for a more public record for the community and public watching, just to give a bit of an update about what's happened and we were heading a wee bit. Very happy to answer any questions.
Okay, councillors, opportunity to ask questions on anything. Very good, very informative report. A lot of things that have been going on through lockdown period, and obviously I think your team's been doing a lot of great work there, Mr. Jorgensen. So thank you for that. So, councillors, any questions? Councillor Wallstein.
Thank you, Mayor Churcher. Just going to page 137 of your report, Neil, and the photograph of the loss of land to the storm at the end of, I think, Caledonian Road, if I'm correct. But just a question: there's in that photograph there's a building which is now very close to the cliff, the sea face, the cliff face, which the sea's eroding into. Whose responsibility is it to try and stop that erosion? The building owner, or does council have some responsibility? Can you advise, please?
Yeah, so it's the landowner. So whoever's got land it's their land, and they can choose to protect that land or not protect that land as they see fit. So there's no responsibility on council to protect private land from natural processes, either in the river space or in the coastal erosion space, for that matter.
Thank you.
I just comment on that, because we do often get ratepayers asking us or saying, why aren't we protecting their property? And the reality of it is we've got a number of assets ourselves that we need to protect from erosion, and obviously ratepayers have to pay for that, and even doing that relatively small amount is quite an impost on ratepayers, and to try and do even more is just not financially prudent. So it's a shame, but that's always going to be the risk when you buy property, as to whether there's going to be erosion or other natural hazards. So that's just the way it is, I'm afraid. But Councillor Milmine.
Yeah, just out of interest with that one, probably a little bit off topic, but is Kiwi Rail keeping an eye on that coastline and having any intention of potentially stepping in? It's getting awfully close to the railway tracks.
Yeah, Kiwi Rail have protected their piece of land in the past, and yeah, the recent heavy seas did result in more erosion, as you can see. And my understanding is that they should be underway with repairing some coastal protection works for their land only as a result of this latest event. I'm not quite sure whether they've started yet. Mr. Pacey, do you know if they've started works yet?
Yeah, through the chair, they did plan to start the start of last week. I haven't been to see if they're in action, but they jumped pretty quickly to, because we had some stormwater pipes which also got damaged. So we were working in with them to fund a portion of it.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions there, Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, look forward, Neil, to seeing the Three Waters Proactive Communications Plan. But question on page 141, the new contracts at the tender process stage, including the Bridge Renewal Program, 7th Street retaining wall, resealing, road marking, any time frame for when those tenders might be let and or work start? Notably, perhaps the 7th Street retaining wall?
I'll just pass over to Mr. Harrison, but yeah, they were pretty imminent.
Kia ora, good morning all, and through the chair. The first of those tenders coming is out for at the moment is the 7th Street wall. There is 9 tenderers or 9 people that have picked up tenders documents for those, so we expect within I think it's 2 weeks for those tenders to close, and we're looking for a start on that as early as possible. The other ones are in process of going out for tender, so most of those works for the remaining contracts are for renewals, and they'll start in the new year.
That's good to hear. Thank you. Any more questions moving through that report? Councillor Tavendale.
Just on page 144 around the pool, just want to know what differences will the public actually see from the upgrade, and what's sort of more behind the scenes, and any idea of when we're hoping to open?
I'll just pass on to Mr. Vanderspeck for that one.
Yeah, good morning, councillors. The biggest change I think they'll see is the refurbishment of the change rooms. Sorry, I'll just start my video as well. That's probably most going to be apparent. The other changes that they'll largely notice is the new carpets that are going down and the refurbishment of the trackside grip floors. The other changes that they won't see is largely tiling work around the internal of the pool, which won't be so noticeable, but obviously increases the life of those pools. As far as the opening date, we're still working through that with our contractors, and we'll be putting communications out to the community on that. Obviously, through having brought our program forward from July to coincide with level 3, we've had to sort of negotiate and work to get our contractors on site, but they're also trying to still get some supplies that were coming from overseas, and that's just going to affect our time frame at this point in time.
Thank you for that. And just noting a Facebook post from the Aquatic Centre. Can you say how many kilometres of grout are being regrouted?
No, I can't. Sorry, you've probably seen a post I haven't seen yet.
Yeah, no, I think so. No. Interesting fact, 7 kilometres of regrouting being done. So pretty impressive amount of work that's going on there. But really good to see the progress happening. So, yeah. Anyway, moving on. Any other questions on that report? Okay.
Happy to move the recommendation, Mayor Kircher.
Councillor Hopkins and seconded Councillor McRoby. Those in favour, could you please raise your hand? And anyone against? That's carried. Okay, thank you very much. And to Mr. Jorgensen and your team, thank you very much for your good work. As I say, there's a lot of things happening around the place, even during lockdown, and it's good to see the lift in activity once we went to level 3, and I'm sure even more so with level 2. So thank you.
My pleasure.
Right, moving on to page 147 and the People and Culture Group update. So ask Mrs. Bailey to introduce her report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everybody. The purpose of this report really was to give an update on what's been happening in the People and Culture Group throughout the lockdown period. And there's just a few items in there that I'll touch on as we go through it. So firstly, we have been able and very fortunate to be able to redeploy a huge number of the staff of council, and that redeployment continues as we move into level 2 with some of our facilities not yet being back fully open. So there's been some really great work there, and I've been very appreciative of the staff and the work that they've put into that, as has already been reiterated earlier. Secondly, we've talked in the report about the Forrester Gallery opening, which has been a long coming event, which we're aiming for middle of June, so that's very exciting. The archive we had originally planned would open up fully into level 2, but as the report says, we will open via appointment just to ensure that we can manage the specific distancing and hygiene practices as we move through into that level, and we've only had minimal inquiries through to March anyway, and April. And finally, the Opera House, we've talked in this report to open the cafe into level 2. We've actually reconsidered that, and we would like to keep the cafe closed at the beginning of level 2 for a number of reasons. One, it really is there to support the activities that are going on in the building, and this is one of our units that is going to take some time to get back up to running and hosting shows. Another is that we're also cognizant of the fact that there's a number of local cafes that are just trying to find their feet and get up moving as well. So we think it would be sensible for us to continue to redeploy our staff from the Opera House, as we've actually been able to do, and have more redeployment opportunities for them now. So I do have a number of my managers here to respond to questions along with me. So I'll hand the report back to you and see if there's any questions, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I just want to commend that decision on the Opera House Cafe. This is a really tough time for hospitality, and there's a lot of businesses struggling to survive, and we don't need to be competing in that space when we've got other things that those staff can do. So thank you very much for that. So we'll just work through by facility by facility. So anything on the Forrester Gallery to start off with? Was it you, Councillor Hopkins?
Yes, it was.
Right.
Look, when we were originally looking at opening the gallery, I raised the question of what we were going to have by way of an exhibition or an opening or reopening. And I think what's happened since has placed, from my point of view, made it even more important to have something a bit celebratory and a bit of pizzazz and fizz. Now, I know that the only exhibition proposed previously was the Dawn Raids event, or Dawn Raids material that was going to be exhibited. I just think that what we've been through as a community here, I'm wondering if Lisa and or Jane would comment on the benefits of having something more of a celebration, and if so, what, and is there time to do that?
I'm not entirely sure if I've got Mrs. McKnight with us yet. She was hoping to join us, but was actually working this morning actually in our sites. But to respond to that until she comes available, if she does. One of the issues we're still going to have when we reopen, if we're in level 2, we don't actually quite know the full detail of that, is obviously the limitations on size of gatherings. So that is something still to be considering. I understand what you're saying, Jim. Jane has got the more full detail on the planned programs, and yes, we've had to move our programming around a great deal, which has had limitations on what she's been able to bring in as well. I will have to come back to you and perhaps discuss further with you elected members in terms of the specific programming, as it looks like Jane hasn't been able to join us yet. But I do hear what you're saying in terms of being able to celebrate. It looks like we're going to have a relatively soft opening to begin with anyway, if we're doing it under these limitations at this stage. But that doesn't mean that a more grand opening celebration couldn't occur when these restrictions are lifted.
I'm pleased to hear you say that. I mean, playing around in my mind has been the idea of having an exhibition of community creativity. What if COVID craft or COVID capers or COVID creativity, and what if people locally made and produced and did while they were in lockdown? Anyway,
great start to that conversation we're going to have. Okay, right. Thank you very much. Anything else on the gallery? Okay, move on to the museum and archive. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, look, I'm sorry. I think the archive should reopen. I'm sorry, I do. I was using it pre the lockdown, and I think doing it by appointment is unduly prescriptive and restrictive, and I just asked Lisa to reconsider that.
If I could respond to that. Yep, thank you. We're certainly watching the number of inquiries that are coming through. Mrs. McKnight talked at quite depth with her team involved in this, because they had originally decided to open at level 2, and they really did feel that with the numbers coming through and due to the practices that they needed to adhere to and the space that they were operating in, with also the work being done in the museum, that this was the only way to do it for now. But we'll keep an eye on the numbers of requests as they come through, and it's just a temporary measure at this stage.
Thank you.
Right, anything else on museum and archive? Okay, right, move on to libraries.
Skinny modem, the skinny jump modem was great. Well done, Debbie.
Okay, no questions there. All right, these are all been really good, descriptive paragraphs on what they've been doing, which has been very helpful. A lot of inventiveness that's come through from the COVID lockdown. Right, moving on to Opera House. Any questions on that? Councillor Tavendale.
Sorry, I was just back at libraries.
Yeah, okay.
I just see that we're looking at working with the Solomon guidelines around libraries. I just didn't get a really good understanding from the document exactly what we'll be doing. Like, presumably public will be allowed in the library. There'll be a maximum number of people, social distancing, that kind of thing. Is that the intention?
Yes, it is. I might just defer to Mr. Van Zyl to provide some more detail on that.
Thank you.
Indeed. We've just finished our plan this morning, and what we'll be doing is from this Thursday on, we'll be on all hands to the pump. We'll allow all books to be returned. We can't open the library until all material is back, or most of it is back. And we envisage that this should be all done by the 21st. So in other words, the following Thursday. And in line with most libraries in New Zealand, we'll only be opening for the returning and issuing of material. We will have our free computing available for people that needed to apply for jobs, CVs, communication, and so forth. But we won't be able to accommodate people coming in and socializing, etc. We will be applying quite strict quarantine rules. We'll be quarantining all our books in the Foundation for the Blind Library. I phoned them and got permission to do that for the next 2 months. So books will be returned, go to the blind hall after being checked in, and then onto the shelves. I think that will be it all in a nutshell. Councillor.
So the books get cleaned, do they, as they are returned, or?
No, some libraries clean it. We've decided it's going to be a lot less invasive and staff intensive because we've got the Foundation for the Blind Hall at the back, just to put them on trestles there for the 3 days that they're expected to rest and germ themselves, and then they'll be going onto the shelves.
Thank you.
Self-isolation for 3 days for the books. It's good. Yeah, certainly wise. Councillor Newton, are you wanting to talk about libraries?
Yeah, just wondering how that applies to the Palmerston Library. Self-isolation of books. We don't have the hall.
There's not such a big volume, and I've already spoken to Pam Hicks. It will be possible to use space there that will isolate the material, and so we'll basically be following the same protocols as we do here.
Appreciate that, thank you.
Right, Councillor Hopkins, were you on libraries or Opera
No,
House?
the Opera House, Mayor Kircher.
Go for it.
Well, yes, Francis, Lisa, just a question. The venue is now being set up for reopening at level 2. Now, if I understand what what was said yesterday, cinemas are open and so forth, and I'm assuming that you can have groups inside meetings of up to 100 people. Is that correct?
We can have performances up to, yes, in meetings it's up to 100 if we follow all the guidelines. At the moment, we're surveying our audiences and our meeting clients just for the appetite to return. Everyone's very familiar with this forum at the moment, and I think it's going to take some time for that confidence to be restored. But we have our first live performance scheduled in July, which will be a family show, and it's how we manage that. The other thing that it will be about price and affordability for families, given the economic situation.
But I mean, if a community group wanted to book a venue for the sake of argument, presumably a group that might have booked the ink box would now go into the main auditorium to allow spacing and so on, but they could still do it. That's the real quick. Yes, good. Yes, no, thank you. So you're open for the public to gather again and hear things and engage with each other within the parameters that have been set out.
Yes, yes, so they can book with us by phone or online.
Terrific.
Mrs. Bailey.
Thank you. One thing I'd just like to add to that, and it is for a conversation on another day, but we've got a real opportunity with the Opera House because of the size of our venue and our rooms there to be able to consider what we can offer to the local business community to use our facilities with wider spacing, with all the appropriate hygiene practices in place at a different cost to what they would usually have paid prior to the pandemic environment. So that is something that I would like to talk to councillors that could also further support the local economic resilience in the near future as well.
Thank you very much. Councillor Milmine.
Thank you. Mine's just a random question. It's just of interest. I saw the survey coming out regarding the Opera House. when people need to vacate their seat halfway through a show, will the entire row have to vacate in order to keep up with social distancing norms, or is there a plan in place to separate the rows from front to back?
So that will be managed more with timing of events. So ideally people go in prepared and not needing to leave. And an hour and without interval is sort of guidelines at the moment. So if they will, but the spacing will be such that there shouldn't be too much disruption if people do need to move out of their seats. Yeah.
Thank you. Just interested.
Yeah.
Yep. Do what your mum always told you, go before you leave home. Okay, moving on. Any other questions, comments around the Opera House? Okay, we'll move on to customer liaison, and obviously things are going to change fairly soon there. Mrs. Bailey.
Certainly. So we've got Mrs. Hicks here with us, and I'll let her introduce what our plans are for reopening the main building.
Thank you. Mrs. Hicks. Just on mute.
Is that better?
Yes.
Finding the right button was my first obstacle. Thank you, Mrs. Bailey. So we have taken the protocols and all the lessons that we hope we will learn moving into Alert 2. We have installed, now this will be Palmerston headquarters and Palmerston, because we have a service centre in Palmerston as well. So this encompasses both locations. So we have what we call sneeze guard screens installed on our front counters, and we have queue stanchions, which are the what you see in the airports for queuing people in and out, and we've got them located at our 2 metre mark. So we will also have someone located in the inside of our foyer for possibly the first couple of weeks until this is reviewed again, and we will have one in, one out for people coming in, remembering that it is rates time, so there will be a lot of people around, and we are encouraging people, of course, to pay by alternate means if they are able. But we are aware that we will be quite busy, so that is why we will have somebody in the foyer. We'll have people, 2 people inside and 1 waiting, all with the 2 metre distance. So we have a roster which people will be able to see when we have cleaned all our hard surfaces, so they will be done hourly. And the team in the back office will be adhering to all their personal and all the hygiene that they're required to, which they do on a daily basis anyway. We do have some people on our staff who are pretty good at keeping things clean, so they'll just be at a heightened doing all that. So hopefully we have got our staff and our customers covered for being safe and looked after, and obviously with great customer service during this time. It's going to be a moving feast. We're going to learn a lot.
Thank you very much. And Mrs. Bailey, you want to add to that?
Yeah, thank you. The only other thing I would add, and it goes across all of our sites as we reopen them, is that we will also be putting the contact tracing aspects into play as well.
Yeah, so I noticed on our live stream we've got someone asking how do they pay their rates, so hopefully that's been helpful to them, that we will be open and we can take the physical rates payments. Right, any other questions, comments on that, or anything else in the report we may have missed? I'd like to move we receive the report. Councillor Tavendale, Councillor Milmine, thank you. We'll put it, those in favour, please raise your hand, and those against, and that is carried. So thank you to you and your team, Mrs. Bailey, and again, you know, there's some really good imaginative solutions being brought to bear to try and make sure that we're offering as many services as we can, but still obviously keeping people safe. So thank you.
Thank you.
Right, we now move to the Heritage Environment and Regulatory Group update on page 158. and ask Mrs. Guyon to introduce her report.
Thank you very much, Mayor Kircher. Look, I'd just like to start by apologising. I'm not quite sure why all my text is in bold in some of those parts there. I wasn't intending to yell at you or highlight us in particular, but I'm sure it didn't look like that when it left my email. So I need to look at what's happened there. But our report, we just had a look at what we have been doing. And I guess more importantly about what might happen in the future. It's been a little bit challenging for us to preempt what impact this crisis might have on the building and planning areas and the wider regulatory environment. But we obviously will monitor that over the coming months. I guess the good news for Waitaki is that we do have quite a lot of consents on the go at the moment that look like they are going to continue. And I also want to highlight that while we've been in lockdown, our community wellbeing or our community development team has really been working very hard with the various networks in the community. And I guess I want to highlight the good work that has been done to date that has enabled our community to respond very well in this situation. Our decision to move to an electronic platform for building has made it very easy for that team to be able to work from home. And I guess it's highlighted for us how far we've come in that our efforts to take a paper-based planning solution and try and make that work from home has been quite challenging and difficult. So our team has had quite different and diverse experiences in aiming to work from home. So hopefully all of my team has been able to join us and they'll be available for any questions that you have.
Thank you very much. Okay, getting into it, Councillor Holding.
Thanks, Michelle. Just saying in the report that we've been offering virtual options on the building inspections. Just wondering if you could comment on how they've been going and do you think this is something we could take in the future?
Yes, Mr. Cook might like to comment on that further. It is early days. Roger's there. Yeah, thanks.
Good morning. Yes, the new technology that we've implemented, it is still very early days, but the early indications are that it does have huge potential to streamline some of the inspection capability. It won't be suitable for all types of inspection, but some of the more minor and more straightforward inspections, I believe that it will sort of revolutionise a large section of our work.
Thank you. Right, any other questions as we work through? Councillor Tavendale.
Just on page 161, when we talk about parking and it going back to enforcement again in June 2020, are we reviewing that before we start enforcement again? Are we able to?
It's probably something for us to answer ourselves. It's something that we need to discuss and have a report come to us. The intent was to review. The free parking was till the end of June, so the idea is certainly to review that at that time. There is likely to be some enforcement over the next while, but maybe with more of an educational element. That's really around limited time parking and like places like disabled parks and so on, making sure that people are still following those rules, even though obviously there's no need to pay for any parking. So it's something that I think all of us need to keep an eye on. You know, is the parking being used the way it should be? Last thing we want is a main street full of businesses, cars, and the staff cars and so forth. But you know, we want to make sure that we are creating as much of an environment for people to get out there and use local business. So we'll see, and yes, we will review that, and governments will make a call on what happens, whether it's a more medium-term decision or perhaps it'd be good to get that long-term decision made at some stage around parking. Right, Councillor Wolfstein, Councillor McRoby, and Councillor Hopkins. In that order, please.
Thank you, Mayor Kircher. I'm aware it's 12:15. And just a question, Roger. On the top of page 160, you talk about preparatory work to scope bringing practicing work back in-house. Can you perhaps enlarge on that as to how many staff are involved, or what? Any further details that are available at this point on that investigation?
Yes, certainly. We currently contract out our competency assessments and technical audits. And the part of that preparatory work was just to get an idea around how much work and what qualifications our own team would have to be able to undertake that work if we decided to bring it back in-house as a result of, say, a fall off in our consent and inspection workload.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and just remind lunch is scheduled for 12:30. Councillor McRoby.
I just sent you a message, Gary, just so I didn't need to. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Busy replying to other messages at the same time. It's a multitasking thing. I think we'll leave it to women. Right, Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, look, a couple of questions on pages 160 and 161, and then planning a bit later on. But right now, at the bottom of page 160, there's a reference to working with the Mackenzie Basin Alignment Program Agency to secure district plan review funding and make a joint request to relevant ministers for nature-based employment in the area based on a regional hub model. Now, sorry, when are elected members going to be told about what's going on with this accord, which we were told at the start was a program to align plans and rules by 5 different agencies, nothing more. And it seems to me that it's becoming quite significantly more without necessarily us having a chance to comment as to whether we believe it should or not.
Can I respond to that one through the chair, please?
Yes, go. Thank you, Mr. Burrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The opportunity for government funding, I guess, has really just come about through the COVID-19 situation. And it was just sort of put to us that the government was looking for what they deemed shovel-ready projects, and whether there was any scope to work with us in some of those areas. And Mackenzie Alignment is an example, I guess, of a close working relationship between different agencies and a sort of a natural fit. And so the conversations have really gone from there. I don't think we've seen anything concrete to date, but I know that there are discussions going on about, well, what might this involve and where this might go to. But I guess it's just an opportunity for government funding in a couple of key areas that's only really become available as a result of the situation that we're facing.
Well, look, I would simply flag, cut to the chase, I'd simply flag that if discussions are going on, I think at some point, preferably sooner rather than later, they should include us. And that, to my mind, I see the Mackenzie alignment becoming what I feared it would, i.e. an attempt to trump the Mackenzie Accord by some of the agencies involved. And I think elected members need to be involved in it a little bit more than they have been so far. Just very quickly also on page 161, Michelle, looking at the Alcohol Accord's best practice review, assessing if an accord amongst licensees is needed to moderate patron behaviour. And you go on to say, we've got a high level of compliance and therefore the establishment of an accord is not seen as necessary. Just wonder, I would have thought that would have been a decision for the DLC. What's your view?
We did, this is new information that's come in obviously with this document, but when we reviewed the alcohol bylaw, we did talk then about whether an accord would be useful. And we made a decision at that point that Waitaki probably didn't need it because of how our businesses operated and the high level of compliance that we had. And when we read this document, and if Andrew, I can't tell if Andrew's on here, but when Andrew and Carolyn read this document, they couldn't see anything that would change that decision that had been made at that point. Oh, there he is. I see you now, Andrew.
Yeah, Andrew's there. Yep.
So sorry if I can just respond to that through the chair. I asked our alcohol inspector in regards to whether there was anything that needed to be looked at there, and she was looking at what other areas were doing, and based on what Michelle has just said, we felt we were in a pretty good position in regards to that, and that there wasn't really any necessity to review it and to actually go any further with that. It was merely just an exploratory exercise to see if it's something that we should be looking at.
I think it's a point of principle. All I'm trying to say is I think ultimately the DLC should sign it off rather than us being told that there's no need for anything. That's all. That's how governance and management work, I would have thought.
Okay, I just make comment to the McKinsey alignment. We were due to have a briefing and it would have happened by now, but the lockdown actually prevented that happening. So it was, it's being rescheduled. So that will happen in due course. Right, any other questions for the report? Otherwise, Councillor Hopkins, yes?
Yeah, I did have, on page 166, we've got references to resource consent numbers falling from 131 to 105 next year. Now, if I'm right about that, that's a week basically, and yet the next paragraph says we still have to employ, we still have to fill the 3 vacancies. Now, if consents are going down and there's 2 a week, 3 vacancies still need to be filled? Question mark.
Maybe if I could answer that through the chair. You may be aware that we haven't filled roles for, some roles have been vacant for a very long time, and just before lockdown, our resource consent planner, Elodie, moved to the waters team. So we've actually got less staff than we had in lockdown. We're no longer using casuals, and we're trying to manage with reduced reliance on consultants. If we don't recruit now and we don't get an experienced planner, we have got to go through a training regime with these people, and we want to be in a position where we can respond to our community as things rebuild. But we're not managing the workload right now, and we are getting a large number of general inquiries through the phone. Hamish, maybe you can give a bit more detail around that we are struggling to manage right now.
Yeah, we can, just to flesh that out a bit. So there's potentially up to 5 or 6 potentially notifiable resource consents that we're currently working through. And I have flagged in an earlier email to councillors at least 5 of them. Some of them are to do with Macrae's mine, so they're quite complicated. So it is sort of odd, I guess, in some ways, that the expectation is that there will be a lot less consents. But right now we've got some quite complicated beasts in front of us, and it is stretching the team, because it's really, at the moment, myself, Sherilyn, and one other part-time planner in that sort of consenting space to deal with PINs, LIMs, resource consents, phone inquiries, and the like. And so we're basically having to poach staff on the district plan to cover bases for resource consent related matters.
Thank you. It's a good response. Okay, any other questions? Councillor Wallstein.
Yeah, just to go to the last page 168, the last little panel there. Again, it talks about the Mackenzie alignment agencies, and it does say there, perhaps Hamish, that it talks about strands of achieving this could be eliminating wilding conifers in the Mackenzie Basin and diversifying tourism and land use. Can you comment further on that, Hamish? Because I'm certainly a major supporter of eliminating the wilding pines in the basin. Can you provide any further information?
I guess it's early days, but yes, the government is looking to pump a lot of money into wilding pine control in that general area. And perhaps I will try and provide council with a few more details on specifically what that involves in the next couple of days. I don't have any more details than that, but I guess that is an encouraging sign and part of this overall kind of framework that the alignment offers us to access government funding.
Thank you.
I just think maybe Mr. Power might have some other information he can add on, add to that particular topic, if possible.
Yes, thank you, Mr. There's a press release currently being prepared at the moment between the 5 agencies and being coordinated by LINZ in relation to the wilding pines issue, and that should be issued probably today, if not tomorrow, but is very positive. Yeah.
And just note too, a couple of nights ago on TV news, it made that news, and of course they saw Mackenzie Basin as being all about Mackenzie, but a good chunk of it's actually in the Waitaki district. So yeah, there's great employment opportunities. It's looking at, particularly around the wilding pine removal project, is looking at absorbing some of those maybe tourist jobs and others that are going to need some work for the next time ahead of us. Anyway, moving on.
Just a comment, Gary, just some final comment from me, just that, yeah, like the high country landscape's an iconic landscape, and the quickest way to ruin that is to allow the pines to spread. So any work in that area is to be applauded.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. We've got 3 minutes left, so we want to get through this report. Councillor McRoby.
Very quickly, thanks, Chair. Just on the Mackenzie alignment agencies, it seems like it's more of an operational body, but who is looking after it from WDC's perspective, from a governance angle?
So that is really, it's primarily come through the CE, and that was how it was originally designed, through the CEs, and then I guess we in planning had a natural sort of synergy with it. Can I just add just one little addition, that MPI is set to announce about $2 million worth of funding for national wild and conifer control, and some of this will be coming to Mackenzie Basin. So that's the only little snippet of additional information I can add on that point to Councillor Wallstein was asking. Thank you.
So a workshop would be quite helpful to get some more information about this organisation and how it operates. Great, thank you.
Yeah, it was originally set up amongst the CEs of the 3 councils involved, Mackenzie, Waitaki and ECAN, and the CEs of LINZ and DOC, I think it was. But Mr. Power, you might want to just put a final comment on that one.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, it's chief executives initially, first and foremost, in relation to attempting to remove the complications and discombobulation of resource consent application and processing that landowners in the area have historically suffered from. So the intention is to make it a more seamless and efficient process, and a lot of progress has been made in relation to that. Intention has always been for the program to evolve and to incorporate elected member contribution to further improvements that would you might consider to be more policy related.
Sorry, Mr. Power, I'm just going to have to cut you off there. We're about to go for lunch, so we'll come back after that and we'll receive this information. So in the meantime, if everyone can turn off cameras and mics and go and have some lunch. See you at 1. Thank you. Well, warm welcome back, everybody. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to have that wee break and have some lunch. And we'll now get back into things. So we'd left off, we were just dealing with the one of the update reports with Mrs. Guyan, and just wondering if there's any other comments at all. Okay, someone like to move that we receive the information. Councillor McRoby, Councillor Tavendale, thank you. Those in favour, if you just raise your hand, and those against, and that's carried. Thank you very much. And again, sorry, Councillor Hopkins.
I was trying to ask a question just before that went to the vote.
Okay, well, you probably can still ask the question. It won't change.
Okay, very quickly, I should have asked this earlier, apologies. Page 160, planning progressed financial contributions guidelines. What does that mean, and when will we see the outcome?
Hamish, would you like me to answer that?
That's fine, Michelle.
Yep. So we have got a paper prepared for council, and we've been requested to talk with the Development Contribution Committee, which we're trying to organise a time for now. So that's the process for that, Jim. Mr. Hopkins.
So have things changed in terms of what we're charging and how we're determining charges?
Sorry, Hamish, I'll leave that to you to answer.
Not fundamentally, no, but we're trying to be clear and more explicit and more consistent with how it's set out. So as you'll know, with financial contributions, it's a share of the market value of an additional lot or allotment. And the way to look at that has changed as land values change over time. So what we're trying to do is give people a greater steer or to be more transparent into how those charges are set out without requiring people to get their own independent valuation report.
That sounds to me as though the rules may have changed. Rather than debate it further now, I think if we're getting a paper, the council should be aware of what you're doing, what's changing, and have a chance to have some input, I would have thought.
That is the intention.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Tavendale.
Just a quick question for you, Maria Kircher, whether or not with the lobbying government suggestion for the audit costs and increasing the timing of the audit, is there an intention for the mayors in some respect to join together to look at that?
I don't think there's been any discussion that I'm aware of with the various forums that we're involved in. So, but yeah, it's one of those things that's concerning enough that we should be looking into that a bit more and see whether there is something that we need to have a unified voice on. So yeah, thank you for that suggestion. Okay, right. So thank you, Mrs. Guyan, and thank you for your team. We'll now move on to information services and hand over to Mr. Chow to introduce his report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good afternoon, everyone. This is a high-level update on IS Group's activities during the lockdown, and I would like to highlight a few things. The IS Group staff were fully deployed during the lockdown, and we successfully provided ongoing technical services to support council's business as usual activities in a largely different environment. And at the same time, we carried on delivering council's projects, and all projects are on track with no delays, and delivery on them are expected. Thank you, and open to questions.
Thank you. Right, councillors, any questions? Councillor Wallstein.
Thank you, Mayor Kircher, and yeah, thank you, Bill, for your report. Just a couple of questions. On page number 176, you talk about the trying to identify the optimal way to digitize our files. So this has been an ongoing discussion, ongoing project, especially with the property files. So can you add any further information to your, have you managed to identify the optimal way to digitize all the files?
Yes, through the Mayor, we have identified 2 types of council records, and type 1 is better to be scanned in bulk, and type 2 is better to be handled and scanned by us. And I'll pass this on to Richard and Suzanne to further answer this question.
Hi, we've been able to use some AI to analyse our property files. We use things like the amount of consent for property has, the property values, and anything else that we could find to relate to the property file, and help us to estimate if we thought the file was complex or not complex. We looked if it was a commercial property or residential property as well. And we believe we can get better data quality by keeping the complex files in-house for digitising, and having the other ones that are more simple done. So it would enable us to get through our property records much quicker if we can send the smaller, simple ones out for quicker digitising and handle the more complex ones in-house. Just on mute, sorry, Councillor Wallstein.
Councillor Wallstein, you're muted still.
How did that get back onto the image?
Okay.
Just yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't realise I'm coming back onto. Just on IT, Bill, on page 179, the number of 35 laptops were purchased before the COVID-19 close down for staff to work remotely. Will those laptops still be of use to those staff when we're back to normal operating routines, or will there be some surplus requirements, or what's that?
Yeah, through the chair, those laptops will be continue to be used by the key staff members, and as part of the council's business continuity plan. And for as regarding to the old equipment they have, will be used in a different way. So, for example, assign them to the different users, or use them to replace the old equipment.
Okay. Yep. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you. Councillor Newton.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wondering, Bill, or Mr. Chair, page 176, 4th paragraph down, you refer to the authority system being due for an upgrade and the issues you have around the system vendor. Is there only one vendor in New Zealand that can deal with this product? Because it seems to be a bit odd that you've got one vendor for a product in the country, potentially, and
yeah, through the chair,
no leeway to be able to update your system effectively.
Yeah, through the chair, there are more than one system vendor in New Zealand. We have considered the switching vendors previously, and this matter has been discussed internally a few times. The thing is, we are, due to the resource limitations, it is not ideal to go to the market at the moment and to get try to implement another system at the moment. So it's something in our mind and on our radar, and we'll be considering in the future.
Yeah, I was actually referring to another vendor in terms of the same product, whether there are any actually in the country.
So the chair, yes, there are. There are 2 other major competitors in this ERP or enterprise resource management system world. Again, we due to the current resource limitations, we have considered going to the market, but it's not a good time at the moment.
Just clarification here. I think Councillor Newton's asking, is there someone else selling Authority as a product?
Sorry, no, no. But we do have another. We do have another small vendor which is established by some ex-employee of Authority, and we are liaising with them, and they are providing some services to us.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, Bill, two questions. One, I'm slightly surprised to see that reference to Civica being unhelpful or providing poor customer service, because they used to have a Civica users group in New Zealand, one that our council was a leader in, and things seem to be pretty good. So obviously they've fallen off the cliff in recent times, have they?
Yes, they do, and Authority is going through some internal changes as well, so that probably didn't help.
Is there still a users group, a New Zealand users group?
Yeah, yes, they are.
Are we still involved as we were, quite as a lead council in some respects?
We are participant. We are participant of the user forum,
but not a leader anymore.
Correct. Okay. Any other questions on the report?
Yes, just one. Very quickly, you talk about the budget at the start, the Wi-Fi Waitaki project with free Wi-Fi in key locations. Do you think what's happened with tourism calls into question the need to do that this year? Bill?
So the chair, to answer the question, we have to go back to the original to identify the reasons we want to do this district Wi-Fi project. It was partly established to support the tourism activities. So, for example, a landing page to give tourists information about what's going on in the district, etc. There's another reason we wanted to establish this project which is to provide Wi-Fi activities to low socioeconomic group families, and this is going to help bridge the digital divide that we're seeing in many areas of the country. So I do see there's a reason that we continue to carry on this project.
Thank you.
Councillor Tavendale.
Thanks, Bill. I wonder whether we've got more financing opportunities available to us for some projects like that at the moment than we've seen in the past. So whether or not we can make sure we are covering our bases there. But also just wanted to say a massive thank you to your team, because we've had a pretty massive disruption to workflow, and I don't know how the ones are feeling, but it's been quite surprising how you've made it. It probably hasn't felt effortlessly from your side of things, but it certainly looked pretty good from our side of things. And we know you've done some incredible work in the background with your team. So yeah, huge thank you for your efforts on there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, anything else? Right, we'll take mover and seconder for that report, to receive that report. So Councillor Wallstein, Councillor Halaleli, thank you. Just again, a show of hands, those in favour of receiving it, those against, that's carried. And I absolutely reiterate those comments, the support. All of the challenges around getting people working from home and being productive, and we are very grateful to all the work that you and your team have done, Bill. So thank you for that. Okay, councillors, moving on to the Pandemic Economic Recovery Manager update. In his former life, our ED manager, Mr. Quinn. So welcome.
Oh, good afternoon. Kia ora, te lāwhaloa.
So would you like to introduce your report?
Yes, I think we all know that this has been a shock and an unanticipated but also unprecedented shock, because the nature of the effects and the way it affects our economy is very different to something we've had in the past, like a global financial crisis, which has largely been a problem of the financial system, not actually our human and people system and our ability to work and produce. Given also the health implications and our need to look after the welfare of our people. So we're doing some work at the moment collectively with the economic development managers of the 5 districts in Otago and the Otago Regional Council to try and do both a quantitative and qualitative look at where will most of the impacts fall, and that's so that we can focus our efforts, including such things as a stimulus fund, about where can you make the most difference. To get the qualitative inputs, we've been doing focus groups with the key sectors in the economy here, and this has been really great to have that increased connection, because it's not only important for our response now, but in terms of their input into what is this new normal, the future direction of the Waitaki economy, and also what does that mean for the people of the district. So we've done the focus groups to identify issues really in both the input and supply side. How do people actually produce and manufacture what they do, and any market problems? It's been really good. We've identified linkages. So if I look at work we've done with the primary sector, we find that the main concerns there are not about producing on the farm, but actually about the works ability of the processing chain further down to stay functioning. They've resolved issues around Gypsy Day, and I think now feed and transport is going to be the thing on their minds. It's also been really good to look at from these groups to see what is the potential role of council, and we're accumulating those ideas now. You mentioned before, if I can pick up on some previous items that councillors have mentioned, the Dunedin Hospital rebuild. So I am working with the construction sector here to look at ways of whether or not we can use prefabrication as inputs into big projects like the Dunedin Hospital rebuild, and working with Pete Hodgson, who was the previous Labour Minister and now person in charge of the Dunedin Hospital rebuild, to say, well, how do we get regional companies into this? I think we can look at social procurement policies, such as Auckland uses in its Southern project. And that means encouraging consortia of local companies here in the Waitaki to be able to have the scale to contribute, keeping in mind that's all subject to commerce and rules around competition, etc. We're also looking very much to try and facilitate and enable ideas from the groups and the individuals around the community, and feed those into where does the community want us to go. We work with other groups in particular around retail and shop local campaigns, and we realise that they have a time effect which is geared towards the front. Eventually people do start to go back and think about looking at the utility price and range of goods we bring in from other places. So it's a really important thing to do at this front end. But what we have to look at is that in some areas retail was struggling before COVID, so we have to look at how do we change those business models so that they can continue in a new environment. Engineering, manufacturing, we're also looking at opportunities at the moment. We have some companies that have UK suppliers. The UK suppliers are refocusing their efforts, and we're dealing with one at the moment where we may be able to get a license from a UK manufacturer to actually produce all the goods for the New Zealand and Australia market down here in the Waitaki. And for that, I'm talking with the Provincial Growth Fund around, can we get equipment, assistance to buy equipment into these local manufacturing companies. So there are opportunities that do arise out of this adversity. Longer term, I think we do have to look, picking up again on a previous item you raised, things like internet capability around the district, and I'm looking at the moment with Internet New Zealand about where is our ADSL and our VDSL and our ultra-fast broadband, because it's not equal around the district. But in terms of looking to the future, I think we have to be much more resilient about how do we adapt to whatever comes at us next. And I think that now, I think we realise that the digital connection is a huge enabler of our growth and prosperity. One other item councillors mentioned before was the nature-based employment opportunity that is being led by DOC, and it really is around the fact that at this time we can employ people to build on the natural capital that we have in our environment. I think that's very sympathetic with Waitaki's outdoor orientation, and the use of the Mackenzie Bay Basin Alignment Project is an example of we have a fully functioning mechanism now. Let's use it rather than trying to create something new. Outlook for the future, look, still undetermined. If things progress really well, we hope we'll have a U-shaped recovery. Some sectors might be a difference. You know, we might find in construction that we will have work to do from backlogs of work, but then again, in a year from now, we might have another dip as people's behaviours and maybe their cautions about investment will pan out. So optimistic that Waitaki has a good base, but we are going to get targeted pockets of people that are affected, and our main concern there is unemployment.
Councillor McRoby.
Jared, thank you for your report. Look, just a question. I was trying to understand table 3 on page 181V, table 2, sorry, on 181, and table 3 on 182. And under table 2, there's no reference in employment in that schedule to tourism. Yet on page, the next page, there is tourism employment 1,542. So I'm just trying to work out where that sits on table 2. Why is it separated?
Because tourism is a capture of a number of things like an experience operator, some accommodation providers, food outlets. So the economists in their wisdom have a way of accumulating things into a sector base, and that's captured in there, Ross.
Okay, so sorry, one more thing then. So the tourism GDP shown in Waitaki is 95, isn't shown anywhere else in terms of those other sectors. Am I right there? I can't see. What I'm trying to do is compare tourism GDP with all the other sector GDPs, and there's no reference to those. Am I right in making that assumption?
It's captured obviously within the total 100%, but again, it is it's a different way of slicing and dicing the table 2.
The table 2 is to do with employment, whereas table 3 is really to do with tourism performance. So there's no reference to GDP, is there, in table 2, but there is in table 3, but it's only for tourism.
That's true. Yes, we could, if you like, provide another table with the GDP of all the other sectors as well. The reason I suppose at this stage was table 2 was to give you an idea that our focus is on employment and the impact on people. So that other information is available, and I can make that available to you if you wish.
Okay, thank you. That would be helpful. Cheers.
Thank you. Move to Councillor Wallstein.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Kircher. Yeah, well, Councillor McRoby touched on what I was going to ask as well, and that is at the bottom of page 181, Jared. You talk about Waitaki's tourism sector has grown rapidly over the past decade. The data shows the tourism share of Waitaki economy is both higher than the national average and growing at a faster rate, which is great news, and I'm glad to hear that has been the case. But is there in fact a downside now because of the COVID-19 and the tourism downturn? Is there a risk that in Waitaki we'll show a bigger loss of tourism income and tourists than other areas that weren't performing so well? So is that previous success now going to be perhaps part of our problem?
No, I don't think it is a problem that we've had success, because that has been an additionality, an income over and above our traditional sectors. So it is a case of the pie was growing. We do have obviously Tourism Waitaki and the Waitaki Tourism Association working with the national agencies like Tourism New Zealand. Tourism will be redefined for some time. My personal view is that we have a great value proposition in Waitaki, and we can compete for the domestic tourism dollar. I think, though, that what we have to do is put work in to say that the product that domestic tourists will want, we have to work out exactly what it is they want. It isn't what necessarily came through on the bulk international tourist buses going through the main centres. So that's where I think the tourism sector collectively has to redefine its offering and then get out and promote it. So work on the product first, and then you've got something to market.
Indeed, thank you. I agree, Jared. But I think the higher you are, the bigger the drop there is possible. But I think you're right. It is a matter of the local tourism industry both redefining their product, but also redefining their price structures as well to appeal to a more domestic market.
That's absolutely true. We can see a very close neighbourly example where in the Mackenzie Basin, tourism increased, particularly with the advent of dark sky as a hook, a reason to visit the Mackenzie. But what happened was that the prices there went to match the increase in international visitation, and the number of domestic visitors fell off very quickly. So yes, it's an adjustment in terms of price as well as product.
And thank you for a great report.
Thanks, Colin.
Yeah, I think it can only be good if when we diversify our economy. In the past, any time there was a bit of a sneeze around the world with agriculture, we'd catch a cold, and having that diversification is good. The good thing is also that the domestic component of our tourism is largely domestic. The percentage is largely domestic, and with around, I think, something like 75% of the people coming here are New Zealanders, and around 68% of the GDP for Waitaki tourism is domestic visitors. So we've got a very good base to build from, and it's really capitalising on that. And it's great to see Tourism Waitaki's "We Are Missing You" campaign. I've shown my counterparts in Otago and Canterbury certainly had the Christchurch Mayor advising her tourism people that they should steal that theme, but we won't let them do that, of course. But no, very good opportunity to rebuild, though. Councillor Halaleli.
Thank you. Just a question, Mr. Quinn, just in regards to building the capacity of our labour force in the Waitaki area, if there's any opportunities for any pilot programs to include any micro-credentialing, especially within the construction area and engineering. Are there any opportunities that you could foresee that we could leverage from central government for that type of program?
Yes, I think the best pilot we have of that is the work being undertaken by BCITO, the Building Construction Industry Training Organisation, and that has been geared around Otago and Southland. Will have a shortfall of about 4,000 people in the construction workforce over the next 5 to 6 years because of the large projects such as Dunedin Hospital rebuild, the Invercargill Central City shopping mall. Those figures were also based on the tourism trend continuing in Queenstown, so they're now having to go back and review those figures. But that was a good example where an industry took a snapshot and said, given the forecast, we're going to have a problem, so how do we sort it? And so I think we should be able to try and get extension of that across other industries. Again, it's hard to predict at this stage, but I think it is very much those people-based industries that are going to be the ones where we have to change the way we do things and prepare people. We also don't want our tradespeople to leave Waitaki. My preference would be that we can train the young people and the people who want to retrain later in life in Waitaki rather than sending them away to do it.
Okay, councillors, Councillor Hopkins, and no one else after that at the moment. You go for it.
Jared, thank you for your report. Just for your information, perhaps as much as Ross's the point about GDP and so on, I think Pearl produced we've got a one-page, or we did have, and you would have seen this, Gary, that one-page summary of employment in the district in terms of people and percentage of income, and it shows how significant farming is in terms of the total GDP contribution in the district. But it might be useful to dig that out and let newer councillors see it as well, because it's a very simple visual one-page tool that explains all of that. Jared, just a question. We've talked a lot about tourism and the like, but I suppose in a sense one of the economic development wins that we've had in the last 24 months has been out at the airport. And clearly, you know, that what's happened globally has potential to impact on that. How are we sort of, shall we say, nurturing that cradle of ED, or that sort of seedling of ED?
We are looking after it in two ways. The property team looks after the airport infrastructures. It looks after providing accommodation and charging the users rentals, etc. So they are having their own discussions. The future of aviation, I suppose, is again taken a shock and a little bit uncertain because of the potential supply of people on the world stage. It is an interruption. If you look at the long-term forecasts, we were never going to be able to keep up with the demand for, say, pilots and engineers as we were. So how this works out, we really have to see. But we have other users of the airport who are currently engaged in agricultural work and other services. So there's a potential number of futures for the airport. We still have the interest from a new company want to establish it as a launch place for flights into orbit.
That's cool.
Still a very live prospect.
Good.
So yeah, looking for all those potential uses, and I think we're going to see an increase in the rate of development of technology. So we may find that the things like that were the jets and fantasies of little electric taxi airplanes may well come within the next 30 years or 20 years, 10 years. And I think we just have to keep an eye for the fact that we keep our options open.
Yeah, those drone air taxis are being trialled in the South Island now. So yeah, and you are maintaining links with Dawn Aerospace, is what you've just said. Is that right?
That, and also the current airport users as well.
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. Thank you.
So thank you for that. And I think that the descriptor you might have been looking for, Councillor Hopkins, was nest of fledglings out at the airport, perhaps. But it is an interesting situation, and we definitely want to make sure that we're looking after all our businesses around Waitaki. So thank you for that. Any other questions, councillors? Oh, sorry, I did have Mr. Power just to make a contribution about the situation at the airport as well.
Yes, just in relation to the New Zealand Airline Academy, I spoke with Jonathan Manuel about their situation yesterday, and they're in quite a good position in some respects, in that they have a very large number of students actually in New Zealand now, and their work program is fully booked really for the next year with those existing students here right now. So that's really reassuring that they've got a year of runway, so to speak, and it could be a lot more tenuous than that, but I'm pleased to be able to report that.
Thank you very much for that update. All right, councillors, any other questions? Okay, so Councillor Newton.
Yes, I was just wondering how, Jared, through the chair, how the We Are Missing You campaign has been taken up in the district in terms of numbers. Do you have any statistics?
No, I don't have individual statistics. I mean, largely that area, that sector is being dealt with by Tourism Waitaki. However, as a council, we have made available on our website the tools that businesses can download to use, like the collaterals and the posters and things like that. So we are an enabler for that campaign.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's certainly based on all of us becoming ambassadors for the district and, you know, promoting out to friends and family through social media. And that's definitely something that we all can play a part in. And it is making sure that we make sure that the collateral is shared with as many people as possible. But, yeah, good question. Okay, would someone like to move that we receive the report, please? Councillor Hopkins, Councillor Newton, thank you. So all in favour, please raise your hand. And those against? Okay, that's carried. Thank you very much. I'm not sure if some of you are voting against or just slow hands or frozen hands, but there's definitely a majority were in favour. That is carried. Right, that's the end of the public part of the agenda. So we're going to go into public excluded. We need to have a motion accordingly, and we'll have a short break, councillors, before we actually commence that part. So before I take that motion, I just want to thank everyone who has been viewing this. Thanks for taking part. I've had a wee bit of feedback, and it's been quite positive that people do find it interesting. So that is really encouraging, and I just want to assure people that we are talking about how we can continue live streaming once we're out of lockdown and back meeting in the council chamber or wherever it might be. And we'll keep looking at those options, because it's really good to be as transparent as we can be, and having meetings as accessible as we can is a big part of that. So thank you to everyone who's taken part in viewing this along the way. So I'll take that motion, Councillor Wallstein, thank you, and Councillor McRovey, that we move into public excluded. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And against? That's carried. So thank you, and just publicly thank you to all the staff who have been part of this meeting as well. It's much appreciated. And with that, councillors, we'll just adjourn